It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUV Sports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUV Sports.org.
Edition of One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show, 90.7 WFUV, WFUV.org, WFUVSports.org, Facebook Live, however it is that you may be joining us. We are very appreciative you've joined us for this late-night program. We're still kind of new to the late-night format, but we're enjoying it all the same. I'm Dylan Balsamo, along with my partner, Chris Hennessy. How's it going, Chris?
I'm doing all right, Dylan. It's good to see your face again. It's good to be back on 90.7 again.
Oh, it is always wonderful to see your face, my friend. There is a lot to get to today, but before we get to that, let's talk about where are you joining us from right now, Chris?
My bedroom in Southbury, Connecticut.
Wow. Okay, that sounds fascinating. I am currently on campus at Fordham University, Rose Hill in the Bronx right now. This is literally my closet. This is not a set piece. This is not a studio. This is real life. This is truly how it is. But so, Chris, let me ask you, what do you think of this new late night format that One-on-One has adjusted to?
I think it's great. I mean, I think it's throwing it back to the original time slot of One-on-One. For those who weren't there, was Chris Baccia, Jimmy Sullivan, and myself were on the first 11 o'clock show, and Chris and Jimmy talked about it at length, how this was the original time slot of One-on-One, and we're so excited to be back in it. From 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. You know that because it's currently 11:02 p.m. And I'm excited for the expansion of the network. You know, we're on Facebook, we're on YouTube. And it's all credit to Alex Woles and Emmanuel Barbari and everybody putting in the hard work to get us in those places. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, like Chris said, we'll be having you till 2 a.m. this tomorrow morning, if you will. But, you know, I'm really enjoying this new late night slot. And, you know, don't tell anybody we have a late night show because Jay Leno might come and steal it. But but I'm enjoying this. And more importantly, Christopher, we have a whole lot to get to today. And I see you're kind of, those of you listening won't be able to see this, but you're kind of dressed for the occasion, Chris.
Oh, of course. It's Masters Saturday into Sunday as you listen to us. So I had to throw on my Masters polo. To say that this is Christmas in November would be a vast understatement.
Christmas came just a little bit early. And you know what? This is not about sports, but I'd like to talk about this. You know, in this time of unrest in the world, in the midst of pandemic and a host of other things that we don't have time to talk about, people want Christmas time sooner this year. I don't know if you saw it, but Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas Is You is about to chart in the UK right now. It's about to hit the Billboard Top 10 right now.
I do agree with that. Just driving around town, it certainly seems like the lights are going up a little early this year.
So how do you feel about that? Does it make you happy, make you sad? What do you think?
It makes me happy. I'm more of a December 1st guy myself, but I can't hate on Christmas music.
That's absolutely fair. And, you know, that song is certainly one that lifts the spirits. But enough about that. Again, we have a lot to talk about today. So I don't know why we're dilly-dallying. It's really my fault. That we're wasting all this time. But so aside from the Masters, which we'll talk about later and again, and you'll see him throughout the program. But also, this is a big football weekend, but also a rather odd football weekend.
Yeah, very odd football weekend. It goes through two channels, kind of. The 1 o'clock slate, very minimal because CBS doesn't have any games because of the Masters, and some big games at 4 o'clock. But the one that we're going to concentrate on next is Giants-Eagles, which the Giants are 3 games back in the loss column of the Eagles. So it's on paper, it just looks impossible for them to possibly catch the Eagles 3 games back in the loss column with 7 to go. But if they win this game, the Eagles stink. So why can't the Giants win this division? We're going to talk about that. I mean, it's unbelievable to me that a team who loses the Dallas game the way they do, loses the Chicago game the way they do, and loses the first Philly game the way they do, could very easily be 5-4, but is 2-7, is still in the race for this division. I think you can't even say that it's a testament to the positives of the Giants. It's a testament to the negatives of the Dallas Cowboys, the Washington football team, and Philadelphia Eagles.
Yeah, there are certainly high school football teams around this country that have already won more games than the NFC East combined. So the Giants find themselves in an incredibly interesting position at the moment, being 2-7 and not really out of it. But that's the thing about this Giants team, is that they're also not particularly great. You know, I would argue the best game they've played all year was that game against the Cowboys that they lost.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a really odd year for the Giants, and luckily we don't have to talk about the Jets this week because they're not playing. But it's a really peculiar time to root for an NFC East team, I would say.
Absolutely. I mean, especially I think the Giants, because if you look at the Washington football team, they were in complete disarray last year. Their quarterback, they don't really think is the answer. New coach, okay, fine. For the Cowboys, they're on their 11th quarterback, who we've never heard of, and their coach, it doesn't look like he's doing that great of a job. Okay, so the poor record has some standing. For the Eagles and the Giants, this is the team that we think is the best team we could put out there, right? It's not we're in quarterback peril or our coach stinks or whatever. It's for the Giants, we hired a coach, we drafted a quarterback, we have receivers, we have the number 2 overall pick at running back, not anymore, and there's pieces on the defense, and they're still 2-7. So I think that's where all the fire Dave Gettleman talk comes from, that I'm sure we'll get to in the next segment. But if you just look at the Giants on paper, this season has probably been more of a failure than any of the other 4 teams in the NFC East, simply because they don't have the question marks at the quarterback position. Well, they do have a question mark at the quarterback position from outside the organization, but inside the organization, they don't. Where in Dallas, it's I don't even know who on Sunday. And in Washington, it's a cavalcade of Dwayne Haskins, Kyle Allen, and Alex Smith.
It's actually me playing quarterback for the Cowboys on Sunday.
Oh,
so
okay.
I got to fly to Dallas not long after this. So I hope I don't miss my plane, actually. But more than anything, you're absolutely right about the Giants in that, like, on paper, they were supposed to be the completed team. The product was supposed to be like, we have all the stuff now. So, and of course, things have gone wrong for them this season. Of course they have. But that happens for every team. So the Giants, more than any other team in their division, don't have much of an excuse to be 2-7. They have an excuse to not be a 10-win team this year, because I don't think the franchise is there yet. But they certainly don't have an excuse to be a 2-7 team, especially in this division.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So, and there are a host of other things going on with the Giants, specifically with within the team itself with Golden Tate. And we'll talk more about that later, but that's a really interesting situation, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it kind of is the first controversy that Joe Judge has had to deal with on a degree. And I think that many people think he handled it well, in that he was suspended for 1 day of practice, or he didn't use the word suspended, but was suspended for 1 day of practice, and then was invited back to the team and will be used in the offense because he's a part of the offense that they need to have if they're going to go 6-10 to win the division. So, I mean, to me, it was a very big distraction, but it is what it is, and it's over now. But I think that Joe Judge handled it well, and Golden Tate has to kind of just be a little bit quieter. Like, he was also the one who got in the fight with Jalen Ramsey, if I'm correct.
I believe so. Yeah, I believe so.
Well, so a couple of instances with Golden Tate, and we'll see if the Giants move on from him at the end of the season. I don't think that they are in a position, though, to move on from him at the end of this, in the midst of this season, because they're in too much of a playoff race, even at 2-7, to warrant, and with Saquon Barkley out as well, to warrant getting rid of their number 2 receiver behind Darius Slayton.
Absolutely. You talked about how people think Joe Judge handled the Golden Tate situation correctly, and I apologize for whatever lawnmower is happening behind me. I don't know if you can hear that. But even Golden Tate said, I think this was handled pretty well, and he admitted fault. So I don't think it's going to make too much of a difference, but it's certainly something that happened. It's not something that can be completely ignored. But we'll talk more about the Giants in our next segment. I want to touch upon, before we touch upon it much more later, this is also a very odd week in college football. Because we have, last I looked, I don't know if any more has happened last I looked, but there's 15 games that were postponed this week. That's the most of any week this season. I don't think anyone who knows a thing or two about health would doubt that the coronavirus pandemic is getting a lot worse, specifically in the United States right now. We're almost hitting March numbers now. So to even be playing college football at the moment, it can almost seem like a bit of a question mark. Like, why are we doing this?
Oh, 100% agree. And I think we're going to get to a point where fans aren't allowed in the stands anymore because it's just too much of a risk. And we just have to cross our fingers and hope that we can hold our breath through January and play a national championship game. But it doesn't look promising right now. You have many top-notch programs who have postponed games. You have, what happened with Wisconsin was crazy. They play one game, then like half the team has coronavirus. They're off for 2 weeks, and now they're just playing Michigan today. And it feels like the coronavirus thing happened 4 days ago. It happened 2 weeks ago. I know, but time is non-existent anymore. So it feels like it just happened last week. But now they're missing 2 games, and now the question will be, well, what if Wisconsin runs the table and they're 5-0 Big Ten champions? Like, are they going to make the playoff over one-loss Clemson? Like, probably not. But there are 1,000 questions that the committee is going to have to answer with Pac-12 teams and Big Ten teams playing like 5 games. The ACC could have a champion in Clemson with 1 loss, but like who missed 3 games. Like you have no idea what's going to happen. So to me, it just seems like we're going to a place with college football that we aren't going to be able to finish. I hope I'm wrong, but it does not look promising right now.
I certainly hope you're wrong too. And I would argue that of all the postponements and cancellations of games in college football this season, this might be the week where it most affects how we want the postseason to turn out. For one thing, you talked about fans being in the stands. I was shocked that was even something that teams have been able to do this year, specifically conferences. Because here's the thing about all the conferences. They don't have to abide by each other's rules, but they've all had access to the same scientific information. So I'm shocked that they all came to different conclusions. That's the part that really ponders the brain, if you will, at least for me. But like I was talking about, 3 of the top 5 teams, well, actually 4 of the top 5 teams are not playing this week. Clemson is off this week. But 3 of the other 4 of the top 5 aren't playing because of postponements. And if you're working for the college football playoff, that's an enormous deal.
Yeah, it's enormous. And Notre Dame being the only team in the top 5 who's playing this week, that's crazy. And they're playing Boston College, and I hope they'll probably win. Maybe just beat Clemson, they'll probably win. But now you have the question of, well, now are they the number 1 team in the country because Alabama didn't play? Like, I don't know. Like, it's all just like so convoluted, and I just don't know how they're going to put out a 4-team playoff that is unanimous in December. If we get to that point, again, I don't know if we're going to get to that point, but we're going to get, the day 4 weeks from now is going to come, and they're going to, most likely at least, put out 4 teams who are going to play for the national championship. How are you going to legitimately place 4 teams in that championship who everybody in the country, every college football fan, outside of biases, says, yeah, those are definitely the 4 best teams because X, Y, Z, right? Does Alabama get punished for, losing this game to the virus? Does Clemson get punished for losing to Notre Dame despite their quarterback being out? Because there's 1,000 questions that we just don't know the answer to, and it's just going to keep making it harder.
It is going to make it much harder. And, if there's any week for Notre Dame to prove themselves as a team, it's certainly this week when they have the whole stage and the whole country watching to themselves. But we have so much to talk about today. Something we didn't even get to in these opening 15 minutes is Steve Cohen, the new owner of the New York Mets. His first press conference was this week. We're going to talk a lot about that. We have a couple guests for you today. We got headlines with Jimmy Sullivan. That is all coming up. So stay with us. We will be right back. Stick around.
to follow WFUV Sports on all of our social media platforms. At WFUV Sports on Twitter, at WFUV_sports on Instagram, and WFUV Sports on Facebook and YouTube. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Certainly did. We're back here on One New York's longest running sports call-in show, WFUV 90.7, WFUV.org, WFUVSports.org, whatever, whether you're watching through a diamond crystal. We're just happy you're here with us on this Saturday evening. There are plenty of things to do on a Saturday night, and I'm glad you are here with us. And I know I speak on behalf of my partner, Chris Hennessy. I'm Dylan Balsam, and we're back here. So, Chris, we started talking about the Giants a few minutes ago, but let's keep talking about them. Because like we talked about, this is a very peculiar situation they find in that on paper, they're not supposed to be a bad team. And they're technically still in this race, but it is not with high and prideful shoulders.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that what you could look at is what we mentioned before is the close losses, where this team that Dave Gettleman, whose job is now being called into question, rightfully so, has assembled, could have won just about every game they've lost. I mean, I can't rattle off all 7 losses for you, but I can think of 4 off the top of my head that they could have won. Chicago, Dallas, Philly, and LA. They kind of got boat raced in the San Francisco game. So we'll take that one off the board. But I mean, to me, it's just a team who cannot capitalize on the opportunities. And I think that does come down to the quarterback. Can you trust him in late minute situations? Now, the Dallas loss was not his fault, right? Andy Dalton comes in. There was the 2 passes to Gallup, kick the field goal, they win. So that's not Daniel Jones. But in the LA game and the Chicago game, they had the ball to win. In the Philly game, they just really needed to kick 1 field goal on any of the drives in the fourth quarter. And yes, the defense certainly could have stopped them, but the offense didn't go anywhere either. It was a full team, full 53-man loss. So to me, it's the close losses that are going to kill this Giants team. And probably the reason that they're not going to win the division. I mean, I mentioned it before. They're 3 games back in the loss column with 7 games to play. So Philly has their bye coming up. Or excuse me, the Giants have their bye coming up. Philly's already had theirs. So they do have a game in hand. But I don't know. I mean, it seems borderline impossible for anybody but Philadelphia to win this division right now. But that certainly can change in about 12 hours. So I don't know. Excuse me. It's hard to know.
Absolutely. And, I would even argue, you mentioned the Dallas game. I would argue specifically for Daniel Jones, but for the whole team, like I mentioned at the top of the show, that might have been the best game they've played all season. It's probably going to be the best game overall that they will play this season. And unfortunately, they lost it, not by a lot, obviously, but they did lose that game. And you talked about Daniel Jones and how, he starts to become a question mark on whether or not he's effective as his position as the starting quarterback. So let me ask you, Chris, how long do you think it is before you really, really start to question Daniel Jones in that position?
Well, I think a lot of people already are. I think that there's a certain faction of the Giants fan base that wants Daniel Jones to exit stage left at the end of the season. We asked Jake Brown, who's coming up next, about their prospects to draft a quarterback. I won't spoil his answer, but I'll tell you what I think. If they lose out and they're in the Justin Fields race, I don't see any reason you go away from him. To me, Justin Fields is a really good quarterback, and this roster is not prepared to pay a quarterback $30 million a year. Very similar to across the hall, right? Sam Darnold and Daniel Jones have had very similar careers so far, right? They both have shown some things and shown that they aren't that good at the same time. And both have had subpar coaching with Pat Shurmur and Adam Gase and skill position players with the cavalcade of crap that is the New York Jets and some pretty terrible players in the Giants as well. What the Jets are realizing and will realize in April with Sam Darnold is that their roster is not in a position to pay Sam Darnold $25 million a year, which is what a starting quarterback of any caliber commands, right? $25 million a year. Their salary cap, although they have a lot of it, they need to allocate all that money to literally every other position on the field because they're terrible at all 22 of them to improve their team. So that's why they are going to have to move on to Sam Darnold, buy some time with Trevor Lawrence, and start from scratch again. For the Giants, their roster is a little bit more advanced, no doubt, than the Jets. That's not hard to do, though. But again, they might see themselves in a position with a new general manager at the helm, which is, of course, obviously possible, that they're saying, look, we can't in 2 years afford to pay Daniel Jones $20 to $25 million a year because the rest of the team stinks. So we got to go out and sign free agents and draft big guys who we're going to end up paying. So we need to start from scratch at the quarterback position. Look at Philadelphia, for example, right? The reason, maybe not the reason, but a reason they won that Super Bowl was because Carson Wentz was on a rookie contract and they were able to pay a lot of other people a lot of money. So are the Giants going to be able to, is there a Super Bowl window for the Giants? It's not. Spoiler alert. Between now and the end of Daniel Jones's rookie contract. Probably not.
It's a fair point. And I like how you brought up the Eagles, because I think the Eagles are a great example of a team that truly doubled down on their quarterback after 2 playoff runs with their backup quarterback leading the way. And they had every reason to stick with Nick Foles. And then they didn't. They stuck with Carson Wentz. They let Nick Foles walk. I still can't believe they did that twice. Went with Carson Wentz twice over Foles after Foles literally winning them a Super Bowl. But I think this is actually a very similar situation. I agree with you. I'm of the school of thought that, I wouldn't wait too long with either Darnold or Daniel Jones. That there comes a time where you have to be honest with yourself and you got to say, it's time to move on. This didn't work. And it has nothing against Daniel Jones or Sam Darnold. Maybe they'll work better other places. It's happened before. It might happen again. But at the end of the day, it's not working. And, you brought up Dave Gettleman. Do you think this is the last season we'll see Dave Gettleman for the Giants?
Almost undoubtedly. I mean, if they win the division, it's going to be hard to fire him, but I don't think they will win the division. So I think that the product that they put on the field, especially the offensive line, which he came in here saying that he was going to improve, has been terrible. And yeah, there have been good signings, Blake Cashman and James Bradbury to name a few, but there have also been some terrible draft picks and signings, including Evan Ingram, that haven't worked out. So Daniel Jones will be tied to him forever, and that's going to be a negative for Daniel Jones, as Sam Darnold is currently seeing. The GM who drafted you getting fired does not bode well for the rest of his career. But I don't see a way where the Giants miss the playoffs and Dave Gettleman keeps his job. I don't see that combination happening.
I know I'm totally with you on that one. So I found it very interesting. We talking at the end of last season when Pat Shurmur makes his exit from the Giants and Gettleman stays. I found that to be an interesting combination of choices that the Giants had made, because as you know, with a general manager, that frame of mind that he's in is going to stay no matter who that head coach is. So, even if Joe Judge is the best head coach ever, it's not going to change as much as you would want it to. The Giants needed then, and they need it now. They need a general manager change. They need that frame of mind changed. I think it's incredibly vital to their growth as a franchise, and it needs to happen.
Yeah, I mean, you could look at any amount of examples with a coaching change, but not a GM change not working out. I mean, the Jets is a great example. You look at the change from, Mike Tannenbaum to John Idzik. Hello. But keeping Rex Ryan, that was never going to work out for Rex, ever. And yeah, Mike Tannenbaum and Rex were great, and they went to 2 AFC championship games. But by the end, Rex was not that good. And that was not a good combination for the length of career for Rex Ryan. If you're going to fire one of them, you should probably fire both of them, because there's a reason you're firing one of them, because something isn't going right. So why not change everything, unless there's a extreme example of a retirement or whatever. But they have to be in tandem. And I think that, assuming Dave Gettleman does get fired this offseason, let's just work under that assumption. Joe Judge is going to be very instrumental in the hiring of the general manager, as he absolutely should be. But then you look across the hall, and something that I'm very concerned about with the Jets is that Joe Douglas is hired by Adam Gase, or technically, yes, he's hired by Christopher Johnson, but is that much better? But he was hired because of Adam Gase's word of mouth, right? So now my concern is that Joe Douglas, who owes his current job to Adam Gase, is not going to fire him. So then that's a concern for the Giants as well, where if Joe Judge helps pick this guy and he ends up being a bad head coach, he's probably not going to be, but stick with me here, then that guy isn't going to be as quick to pull the trigger to fire him, because he's his friend. He's the guy who helped him get the job, yada, yada, yada. So it creates a really weird dynamic that I don't think works that well in any sport, but especially the NFL. And we've seen it with the Jets. So I really do think that they should have fired Gettleman and Shermer in the same year, especially now when you look at this year's draft class, Andrew Thomas not doing that well. Would a new general manager have drafted Mekhi Becton or Jedrick Wills or Tristan Wirfs or whoever? Who knows? Because it was kind of consensus that Andrew Thomas was one of, if not the best of the four. So would they have drafted a different one? Who the heck knows? It's all revisionist history. But I think that there needs to be a change made there, and then it calls into question Joe Judge. It's the same thing we're going to talk about with the Mets. Does Luis Rojas' job come into question now that there's a new owner and a new general manager? I don't know. So the same thing is going to be said for Joe Judge in April when there's a new, or in February when there's a new general manager at the helm.
Yeah, we're in agreement there. I think almost as a rule of thumb, unless one of the two is the clear problem, unless it is very clear, you could point at the general manager, you can point at the head coach that, like, this is clearly the issue, and we just need to get rid of this virus, and we'll be fine. But when it's not, and things just aren't working, you need a complete change of head, and that goes for both of those positions. But sticking with the Giants here, let's talk about their win last week against the most accurately named company in the history of the world, the Washington football team, which makes me chuckle every time I hear it. I actually named my fantasy football team this year Dylan's football team out of that's insane. So let me ask you, Chris. So it was a win. It was a close win against a division team in a division that is, as the French say, not so good. But look, let me ask you: is that a win that, if you're a Giants fan, you can look at and be like, that's a win we can be proud of? This is a win we can have for our own, or is it just a game against a bad team?
A little bit of both. I think when you're 2-7, any win is a win to hang your hat on, but it also is a win against a bad team. But in order for the Giants to get into this NFC East, they're going to have to beat bad teams, because, spoiler alert, the entire NFC East is really bad. So they're going to have to beat the Benny DiNucci, Dallas Cowboys, or whoever it is, Cooper Rush, Garrett, whatever. I don't even know who any of the people are. And they're going to have to beat the Eagles, who stink out loud. So, I mean, it's kind of both, where it's like, yes, it's a win against a bad team, but it's a win closer to the 6-10 plateau that's going to probably win this division, or 7-9, or whatever the 6-9-1, whatever the Eagles are going to be. So I think that it's a little bit of both, because you have to say a win is a win, but you also have to say a win is a win against the Washington football team, even when the Giants are at their worst, they somehow still beat the Washington football team. I heard an amazing stat, Dylan. I don't know if you know this. Daniel Jones has 5 wins in his NFL career.
Yeah.
Guess how many teams those 5 wins have come against?
Oh, I bet it's probably 3. Is it 3?
2.
It's 2. Wow.
Tampa Bay, the one where he came in for Eli.
That's right. Okay.
The Washington football team. He's 4-0 against the Washington football team. Last year. But the Washington football team. 4-0.
Washington football franchise.
He's won in, it's like 17, 18, something like that. against everybody else. And the one that he won, yes, it was great, but he came in the middle of the game. So he's like 5-18 for them against the Washington football team. When I heard that stat, I had to rewind. You can't rewind the radio, but I had to think about it for a second. I was like, wow, that's amazing. Like you have a team that's so horrifically bad that the only team they could beat is the Washington football team.
Oh my goodness. I need to sit here and revel at that statistic while I have time here live on air. It's wow. They say to be fully emotive on air, and that's how I am right now. But more than anything, something that you are talking about is, yeah, a win is a win, but a win against the Washington football team is a little girl falling off her bike. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's not something where I would, I don't even know if I'm Joe Judge what I would say in the locker room after the game. I'd be like, great job, guys. I guess it's like,
you did what you're supposed to do.
What was that?
You did what you're supposed to do.
You did your job. You earned your paycheck this week. Yep. And no flying colors, but they did it. So, obviously if I'm the Giants right now, I'm really concerned, but that's because they didn't truly address their problems this off season. That's why Dave Gettleman's still being here, like we were just talking about, is they haven't really addressed the issue yet. And until they do that, things aren't really going to change. The definition of insanity is, doing the same thing twice and expecting a different outcome the second time. Right. If you're not willing to part ways with Dave Gettleman, don't expect anything different.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And I would say the same thing about the team across the hall. If you're not willing to part ways with Adam Gase, why would you expect anything different? And with any amount of sports teams and analogies you could possibly think of, it's just time to move on from Dave Gettleman. It's time to move on from Adam Gase, and it's time to move on from the Wilpons. And we could go on a list of New York sports who it was time to move on from that person, and they just need to cut the cord and just do it. And they need to fire Dave Gettleman at the end of the season and have a better draft than they did this year. Because right now, Andrew Thomas is being outplayed by his third-round pick counterpart, Andrew Pert. So that's not too good.
Yeah, this does certainly seem to be some kind of trend with New York sports, which is a whole other problem that we could devote a whole 3 hours to, but we won't today. Luckily you mentioned the team across the hall from the Giants being the Jets. We luckily do not have to talk about them this week because, for one thing, we're going to be talking about it with Jake Brown in the next segment, but also they are off this week. So we can float on a little cloud and pretend
forget they exist.
Forget they exist for just a little bit of time. Because with both teams, it can be hard. It can be very hard at this point in the year to, care. It can be very hard to care. You know what I'm saying?
It is. Look, I know you're a Giants fan, Dylan, but I am a Jets fan. I know our friend Jimmy Sullivan is as well. And many of our coworkers at WFUV. And it is hard to freaking care right now. And I know that Trevor Lawrence is the answer and we need to lose every game to get Trevor Lawrence. But I finally cared in the fourth quarter on Monday. It was finally like, look, they're going to do it. It's amazing. It finally looks like a competent offense. And then it's just the magnum opus of Adam Gase destroying my soul and losing that game. Look, I can go on and on and on, as the people who have listened while I've hosted know. I can go on and on and on about how terrible Adam Gase is. But we don't have to talk about them, so I don't have to. That's good.
Very nice. Very nice. Now, quickly, we have a few more minutes before we're going to go to break again. The Giants have a game coming up tomorrow against the Philadelphia Eagles. So let me ask you, Chris, what is a success for the Giants in this game? And, in inverse, what is a success for the Eagles in this game, do you think?
Well, I mean, the winner, if the Eagles win, you can pencil them in, I think. At 4-4-1, is that right? Yeah, 4-4-1.
Right? Yeah, I think so.
4-4-1, and then the Giants at 2-8. To me, you can pencil the Eagles into the playoffs because the Giants aren't going to come on this ridiculous run, right? And the football team stinks and the Cowboys stink. So to me, an Eagles win doesn't lock it up by any stretch. Anything can happen. Don't get me wrong. But with 6 games to go, it would almost guarantee them a spot in the playoffs. For the Giants, it becomes a 2-horse race if they win, right? Now they're only 2 games back in the loss column. That tie that everybody crushed Doug Peterson for the Bengals game in the tie, it's completely saving them right now, because if they don't punt and they go for it, they miss it, the Bengals get the ball and they win, it's a 2-game it's a 2-game lead in the loss column, turning into a 1-game lead if they lose. So that's saving their behinds right now. But I think a success is a win. I mean, for the Giants, it's a must-win game. The Eagles have a little bit more to fall back on because they've won them a couple more games. But for the Giants, it's an absolute must-win game that if they don't win, pack it up, because I don't see a way. I mean, obviously there's mathematical ways, right? That they could get to 6 wins and the Eagles could lose out except for 1 game and they'd be in. But I don't see that happening. I don't see 4 more wins outside of this game for the Giants. I mean, yes, they have the Cowboys left. That's 1. But outside of that, they don't really have that many more wins on the schedule. You know, the Bengals, okay, maybe. Seahawks, Cardinals, Browns, Ravens, no shot. Seahawks, Cardinals, Browns, Ravens, that's 0-4 if I've ever seen it. So if you lose this game, it's over for the Giants.
Absolutely. I think I'm with you on that one. And with that, we will end this segment. And coming up in just a little bit, it'll be our friend and yours, Jimmy Sullivan, joining Chris and I for headlines. But before that, on the other side of this break, we will be joined by Jake Brown, podcaster from the New York Post. So stick around. We'll be back in just a second.
Check out all of our latest podcasts on WFUVSports.org or wherever you get your shows, including NFL Friday, Nosebleeds, Pick and Pod, 5 on 3, College Gridiron, and FUV FC. Also, our newest edition, Off the Air, diving into the station's legacy with its most prominent alumni. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show. Along with my partner, Chris Hennessy, I'm Dylan Balsamo, keeping you going during this 11 p.m. hour. But right now is a very special time in the show. We are joined by the executive producer and an on-air personality at all the handful of podcasts at the New York Post, including Amazing But True with Nelson Figueroa, Gangs All Here with Brian Costello, and, of course, the Blue Rush Giants podcast. Please give a warm welcome to Jake Brown. Hi, how's it going, Jake?
How's it going, guys? Thanks for having me on the show.
Pleasure to have you. So I want to start with just going through your Twitter as I was maybe 10 minutes ago for the 8th, 9th time. The first thing that comes up, and you retweeted it quite a few times, was what you were saying after Steve Cohen's first press conference with the Mets. And specifically what you said was that this is the best time ever to be a New York Mets fan. I think I got that pronunciation right. You want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, well, thank you for emphasizing. I've retweeted a few times. I thought it was pretty good. So obviously I showed myself some love. It came in the moment. I didn't write it. I was just like, I just need to let this out. I needed to release it. It was just like a feeling of joy that you haven't had as a Mets fan in so long, because there's competent ownership now. I mean, there's no better time, because you saw the vision that he set out, and that's exactly everything that you've been hoping for years from this franchise that you just never got. So not even just in terms of spending money, in terms of treating everyone A to Z the same and putting money into promotions, putting money into analytics, putting money into the minor league system, putting money into, ticket sales and stuff like that. And I think it's important to treat everyone like that. And I didn't feel the organization was like that at all with the Wilpons. So I had to let out a little passion that I had inside, and hopefully in 2021 we'll be back in the stadium so we can see all these things come to fruition in person.
Are you prepared to temper expectations for this offseason for Steve Cohen, or are you you want everybody and anything you can get your hands on?
Not everybody and anything, but I think they have the advantage this off season because a lot of teams are cutting costs because of the pandemic. A lot of teams who had no fans don't have the luxury of $14 billion net worth. So there's a lot of teams who are struggling out there who's saying, we got to sell off this guy. Look at the Cleveland Indians. They're thinking about moving Lindor. They're thinking about moving some guys. And there's going to be a lot of teams in that position. The Mets are not. So this is an off season where they could not get guys in the low, but they have an advantage that if they could throw out a little bit more money than some of these other teams, they can. And, you have Cespedes coming off the books. You're not paying David Wright anymore. You got all these contracts that coming off the books. Wilson Ramos, these guys, you can afford them already. And now you add in this injected boost of cash flow, and now you can. So I wouldn't say spend like a drunken sailor, like he said. I said on the podcast, spend like a 6 to 8 beer in sailor. Like spend like a tipsy approaching drunk sailor. And I think that means, that means you could get 3 guys. I don't think it's out of the realm to say, yeah, maybe they can get Real Muto, Springer, and Bauer, and then fill some, cheaper pieces elsewhere. But it's not something you got to worry about. It's not, you don't have to go out and get the guys and the scrap heap guys at the end of their careers anymore. Now you can go out and get guys like these guys who are in the prime of their career.
Something that stood out to specifically me, but I'm sure for everybody in that press conference, was he gave a timeline. He said 3 to 5 years he wanted to win a championship by. He said if he didn't, it would be disappointing. Is that a realistic timeline, or is that just him being a wishful thinker?
I think it's unrealistic because I think they can do it in 1 to 2 years. I think this team has the pieces in place already. You might call me crazy. They have so much youth in place, and you still have the prime of Jacob deGrom, where why can't this team have a great offseason and be a contender next year? I don't see why not. They were a couple games, they missed this year, but, this was a weird year. This year you kind of throw out the window. I think there's pieces in place. You add a couple of guys. This team isn't far off. I mean, we saw shades of them being a potentially great team this year, and they were missing some starting pitching. So if they could fill these voids, I'm not waiting 5 years. I think this team, 1 to 3 is a better window in my estimation that this team can do it. And remember, the Dodgers have all these guys. Like some of these guys the Dodgers have, like a Seager has 1 year left on his deal, so we'll see if he even comes back. They're going to be losing some guys in free agency. Justin Turner, we don't know if they bring him back. So I really think the Mets, 2021 may be a little crazy, but I think 2022 could be the year we look at as maybe the Mets win a World Series.
I want to switch gears and to the other side of the river. And Dylan mentioned the Gangs All Here podcast with Brian Costello. That can't be very much fun to record right now. I am a Jets fan, and as pessimistic as they come, as you could probably imagine, give me a reason to watch. Give the Jets fans a reason to watch the next 7 games.
Oh man, that's tough. Well, for the people of age of this show, I'd say you need a drink with you. But I think if Darnold plays, he gives you a reason to watch. Listen, I don't think he's going to be back. The issue is if they don't get the number 1 pick, that makes you think, hey, if we get number 2, do we trade it and keep Darnold? I know he hasn't had the pieces around him, but I think he's shown us he's not the answer. But you have to watch him because his trade stock, if you're moving him, is at an all-time low right now. So he needs to have a good stretch of games here just to have, any kind of trade value. Hopefully you could get like a 3rd-round pick, something. Because I'm hoping they don't have to trade him for a 7th-round pick, 6th-round pick. If that happens, then that's really unfortunate. It's really just purely wasted years. So I'd say Darnold. I say Denzel Mims has looked nice. I think if he can develop some chemistry with Darnold, or I guess Flacco out there, whoever they throw out there, we'll see if they even play Darnold. If they might rest his shoulder. I would do that. I mean, in Gangs All Here, I might have a rap this week. I might do a rap. Like I'm thinking about writing. I sometimes do a rap on the show, so I might just write a Jets rap. Trying to keep people entertained on this show is very tough when you're 0-9. But Darnold, I think Mims, I think Crowder could be a piece of this future. He's a guy to watch for with Darnold as well. Quinnen Williams has progressed. I think he's the guy who, you look at a handful of players who are part of the future. It's Quinnen Williams is one of those guys. Ashton Davis, another young player on the defense to look to. He's been aggressive. He's been good. He's been a special teams guy. So you have a couple of young pieces to watch, and in the end, you got to watch for them to lose. I mean, you're watching, hoping that they don't edge out these games like they almost did against the Patriots. You got to just hope they lose, because the difference between, I think Lawrence is much better than Fields, and I think Lawrence is better than anyone else they're going to get. That you really have to focus on at the most winning one game, because the Jaguars' schedule is brutal, and I think the Jaguars could very well go 1-15. So you just got to hope to lose. So I'd say watch to lose at this point.
Jake Brown of the New York Post joining us here on One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show. And staying on the topic of the Jets, if you're a Jets fan, and I'm sure there are many listening, what is the timeline you can expect for this kind of team to be good? What can they expect for the next few years? Does it rely on that first-round pick?
Well, I won't give the Mets timeline of 1 to 2 years for the Jets.
I'd say probably like 5 years. It's going to be a while. I think in 2 years they can compete. It all depends on, how this draft works out. What happens in free agency? Do they spend all the money that they had? Remember, they had $30 million under the cap this year. Will they use that money? They're missing pieces everywhere. You look at the position, they're missing something. So I think they have to put money in every position. They really got to build that offensive line. I know they tried this offseason, and it's working okay, but you still got to put another piece or two in that O-line. You still got to address tight end, because Chris Herndon hasn't been the guy. You have to address receiver. Cornerbacks are brutal. You got to get cornerbacks. You got to get linebackers. You got to get pass rushers. So it really depends on what Joe Douglas's approach is in terms of spending. If he goes, he might have to spend like a drunken sailor, because there's just so many holes that he's got to use all the money. He didn't this year, and I think he knew that this team was far away. But, if you want a quarterback coming in here, you need him to have pieces. Darnold, they kind of did him dirty. They didn't give him enough talent, and I think that hurt his career, and I think we know that. But I think you got to give a new young quarterback the pieces. You got to give him the right coach. You got to give him the right system. And you can't fail another young quarterback. We've seen it far too many times. So I'd say, spend money, do it wisely, but, spend a lot of it. And I'll say 3 to 5, they will be a contender. A Super Bowl contender, probably not, but I'd say they're a playoff contender at 3 to 5.
Do you see, I am asking this fishing for the answer I hope for. Do you see any chance Adam Gase is the coach next season?
If he is, I might jump off my rooftop. No, I'm just kidding. I don't think so. I think he's a bum. He stinks. There was no reason he should have been brought here in the first place. I thought it was a terrible hire. Making the playoffs once with Miami. Look at what everyone's doing since they left. Devontae Parker has been great. Ryan Tannehill made $1 billion with Tennessee. He's making money. I thought it was a bad hire. And, he's lucky to have made it this far. I mean, there's been week after week. You're like, how is he not fired? How is he not fired? It came to a point.
How is he not fired?
Well, it came to a point on the podcast I can't even address it anymore because it's not happening. And, Kaz is not a supporter of him, but he's under the assessment of this team's not going to improve if he's fired. To me, it's more of a principle thing to the fan base. And obviously we're all screaming, how is he not fired? And I agree. And I think a big factor that plays a part in this, guy, is that there's no fans. There's no one to boo him out of the stadium. And I think, he has no pressure to fire him when there's no one there. So I think I think if they do it, it's going to be maybe in December to get a head start on a coach. Ideally, I would not want to wait till Black Monday to do it after the season's over, but it would be a shocker. And I think there would be outrage. There would be riots if he is somehow back here as head coach. And listen, I thought he should have been fired probably after that Denver game was the perfect time to do it. You can argue it was early in the season, but how you lose to a team that bad with a third-string quarterback when you're winning late in the game, they find new ways to lose every week. He stinks. And, we'll see where they go next. The hot coordinator is the enemy. I don't even know. I wouldn't even mind if Harbaugh came back to the NFL and the Jets with Harbaugh. I like a guy with experience and a guy who's proven himself. Even Bieniemy to me has proven more than Gase has because he's won a Super Bowl as an offense coordinator with an offense that lights up the world. I mean, Adam Gase, you could call him a brilliant offensive mind all you want. He is not. That was just false. It's wrong. And just because Peyton Manning said something good about him doesn't mean he's a brilliant offensive mind.
So let me ask you, because you also do the Blue Rush podcast about the Giants, and the Giants aren't having that great of a season either. While they may be kind of close in contention, we'll say they are still 2-7. So, is it something in the water in East Rutherford right now? What is going on?
I like the Giants prospects a little more. I think they have been at least interesting to watch. They're staying in games. Daniel Jones' mistakes cost them. You see when he doesn't turn the ball over, they can win games. That's been the key. I think they're treating the rebuild a little bit better than the Jets are. And I think you see talent in that defense. The defense has played well at times. We had Blake Martinez on the show, and this guy is a true anchor to that defense. You talk about a Dave Gettleman signing that he got right. It was Blake Martinez. The cornerbacks are an issue, but Bradbury's been good. But outside of that, Logan Ryan's corner/safety. Jabril Peppers is finally starting to step up a little bit. There's pieces you can look at there. They could use a bit better of a pass rush. I think if they could get an elite pass rusher this offseason, that'll help the defense a lot. Evan Ingram is just the big conundrum. Like, what is Evan Ingram? He drops so many balls, but he's got so much talent. He's a good pass blocker that you just wonder what Evan Ingram is. If he actually caught the ball and put everything together, he could be a great tight end. Receiver, Slayton's kind of emerged as a guy. Obviously, without Saquon, that hurts a lot, guys. I mean, I know Gallman's looked good, and Alfred Morris has shown – I mean, you forgot Alfred Morris was in the league. I know he's shown signs. But without Saquon, it's hard. And I know Saquon struggled a little bit rushing, but I think the offensive line is coming to its own a little bit. I know it's weird how they're doing it with guys rotating and Lemieux in there and Pert in there. But I would love to see Saquon behind this kind of improved offensive line, and hopefully next year you'll see that. But the big answer is Daniel Jones. I think he shows us the signs he's potential of being a franchise quarterback, and then he shows you signs of not being that guy. So over these last 7 games here, we have to see what Daniel Jones is. I don't think they're going to give up on him, but we need to see him, like last game, not turn the ball over, know when to throw it away, know when to take a sack, know when to hand it off. Just make the right decision. And if he does that, I'm not as worried about the Giants as I am worried about the Jets. The Jets have holes to fill everywhere. The Giants have at least guys you could say, okay, he's a player for the future. He's a player for the future. He's a player for the future. So I know it's ugly. It's hard to watch, but it's crazy enough. Giants win against the Eagles Sunday, and they're in the midst of a race. And that really just sums up 2020 for you at 3-7, that you're in the thick of a playoff race.
Well, and to your point with the Jets, the opposite of the Jets, they have a coach in place who certainly looks like he's the real deal. Do you see any chance? You mentioned Daniel Jones showing signs of the good and the bad. Any chance they draft a quarterback? If they kind of lose out, they're 2-14. They're in the Justin Fields race-ish. Do you see any way that they go away from Jones this offseason?
That's a $64,000 question, right? I think if Fields is on the board, maybe. If not, I think they go more of the veteran quarterback. And they're going to give Jones another year. I don't think they're writing him off. I think he's shown enough where he's probably going to get another year. If Fields is there, that changes things. I don't think the Giants are going to be that bad. Honestly, the Fields will be there. I think they're going to win 4 or 5, maybe even 6 games. Sadly enough, if they have won these close games, they'd be really in the thick of it. They'd be in first place, essentially.
Yep.
So they've showed us that they're right there. So I don't even know if they're going to be in that top 4 or 5 pick range, depending on what other teams do. I think Jones gets another chance. I think they go the veteran quarterback route, trying to bring in a good veteran. I mean, is Colt McCoy really a great veteran? I don't dislike Colt McCoy, but he's Colt McCoy. I'd like them to maybe see, I can't think off the top of my head, but a veteran who's proven something in the league that they pick up. Maybe
Fitzpatrick-esque.
Yeah, like a Fitzpatrick, maybe even Jameis Winston, if he were to be available, if the Saints don't, turn the keys over to him. I doubt that's going to happen. Breeze still shows us he's got a couple more years, and they have Hill as well. So I'd like them to see a Winston Fitzpatrick. Listen, I think Jones, it's 1 week great, 1 week not. 3 weeks bad, 1 week good. So it's really weird, but it's going to be these 7 games that really are the true test. But I think they love him, and I think he's going to be the guy next year, kind of no matter what. But again, you need to have competition for him. That's the key. They haven't done that for Darnold either. They had the backups behind Darnold, let's be real, have kind of been bumps. I mean, the fact that Luke Falk got to start, no disrespect to Trevor Siemian, but you can't have competition and say it's Trevor Siemian. I know you had McCown at times, but McCown has been a career guy who's made money off being a backup that's filled in a couple games here, a couple games there. They haven't brought in a really good backup, like a Nick Foles kind of backup that could really push him to the test. And I think that's important in this league because you see with Darnold, all these injuries that have mounted. With him, every year he's had an injury. He had mono. He hasn't played a full 16-game slate. And I think it's important. I know there's not a lot of them out there, and that's the issue. But backup quarterback, these guys make a lot because it is important when they step in, especially if a team's doing well and they come in and fill the void. That's an important position. So I'd like to see the Jets and Giants both address that this offseason.
I want to ask you very quickly about your craft, we'll say, of podcasting. Because, just recently you had Brandon Jacobs on the Blue Rush podcast talk about Super Bowl 42 a little bit. So that's a pretty high status interview, you might say. But the podcast form, as we know it, is rather laid back in a way. So how do you go about preparing to do an interview like that in a podcast?
I like to have fun with the guests first. If you listen to the show, I kind of set it up. I do the grand introduction for the guests, and then we rotate around questions. We have like a thing like this, a Zoom. It's called Squadcast, where we look at each other, communicate. You go when Lawrence Tynes goes, we put up the L for Lawrence. It's me just putting a loser on his forehead like I'm in Smash Mouth. But we have fun, and I think we all get along pretty well. And we try to, spicing up Paul Schwartz a little bit. He's the older guy, the veteran. He's a writer, so we try to make it a fun show. But really, I've always been built off preparation. I've been hosting podcasts in some sense. I think it's so important to be prepared for your guest and read stuff about them, Google them, see what stories that have been in the news with them recently, where they've addressed certain things, address that, interesting storylines about their life. Go through their Twitter, Instagram, see what's going on with their family. I think these guests appreciate when you know things about them. They love my introductions. I call it their eulogy. I say, we'll read this to you when you're dead in 40, 50 years. Whenever you die, I'll read your eulogy. And they say, all right, they want me to, I'm like their bar mitzvah hype man. Party Hardy Hits Volume 42. It's like now what I call music. I kind of just do that for them, and they like that. And that's what starts the interview lighthearted. Plus, a lot of these guys were teammates with Tynes, so they already have that relationship. We asked them to tell a story about Tynes. What was he like? And it's already built. That show is great because it's built off the friendship and the teammates with Tynes and winning Super Bowls with him. That guests will open up. They'll say how it is, and we've had such a good Rolodex. I mean, we started off with Tracy Morgan as the first guest, so we came out with a bang. We're eventually probably gonna have Michael Strahan on. He's just got 1,000 jobs, so he's hard to get a hold of at this point. But I think kind of making it fun and not just always just sticking to football and stuff. Do the other stuff, and you want to start them light, and maybe you save the hard-nosed stuff for a little bit later. That's something you got to learn early on in the industry. Just save the knuckleballs for later in the interview once they're lightened up. But just preparing well. I say the key first one is preparing, being passionate, having fun, making them laugh. All my guests, I try to make them laugh in some way. Tell a joke, do something, make fun of myself, call myself fat, talk about being bald, something, and they eat that stuff up. So just have fun with it and be prepared.
Wonderful. That's Jake Brown, executive producer and on-air personality of podcasts at the New York Post. Thank you so much, Jake, for joining us today. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, guys. Take care.
To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUV Sports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUV Sports.org.
Here with the headlines. Glad you're with us as we have hit 12:01 a.m. We are into Sunday, November 15th, taking you up until 2 a.m. here on One on One. Chris Hennessy and Dylan Balsamo will join me in a moment, but let's get first to the headlines. We start in baseball. We had a number of key awards named this week. We will start with most valuable player in both leagues. In the American League, it was Jose Abreu of the Chicago White Sox. He wins his first AL MVP award after hitting .317 with 19 home runs, 60 RBI. He beat out Jose Ramirez, DJ LeMahieu, and Shane Bieber, among others, for that award. More on Shane Bieber later. Over in the National League, Freddie Freeman got it done, the first baseman for the Atlanta Braves, hitting .341 on the year, 13 home runs. Freddie Freeman beat out Mookie Betts, Manny Machado, Fernando Tatis. That was your top four in the National League MVP voting. Those are the awards there. Guys, before we move over to the Cy Young, wanted to get your thoughts on the MVP races. Dylan, what stands out to me is a great story with Freddie Freeman coming back after having what sounded like a severe case of coronavirus before the season, and now overcoming that to be the National League MVP.
Absolutely. And to your point about Freddie Freeman, yeah, no, all the reports we heard before the season and as the season was getting started back in July was that Freddie Freeman at one point during this pandemic was fighting for his life. And that's a really, it's a terrible thing to hear, especially from a player that, you might have won the MVP this year, but he's been one of the best players in baseball for more than half a decade now, I would say, or about half a decade, if you will. But to be honest with you, I think this was the right decision in both leagues. Jose Abreu might not have had the highest batting average in the American League, but 60 runs batted in and 19 home runs in this short of a season, that is absolutely astounding. And yeah, Freddie Freeman was, we heard a lot about Mookie Betts this season, but I don't think there's any doubt Freddie Freeman was the best player in the National League. So I applaud Major League Baseball for making the right decision with both of these choices.
Yeah, I agree, Dill. I think that if any of the 8 players that Jimmy just named off, Abreu, Ramirez, LeMahieu, Bieber, Freeman, Betts, Machado, Tatis had won the 2 respective MVPs, I don't think that really would have been a problem. I think all 8 of those guys had really remarkable seasons. But to be fair, I do think that they got it as right as they could in a 60-game season. Like you said, to go 20-60 in a 60 games, in a 60-game stretch of any season is remarkable, and that's what Jose Abreu did. And then Freddie Freeman, another great Freddie Freeman story from the COVID season was, I think it was during the regular season, because it couldn't have been during the playoffs. Maybe it was during the playoffs. He flew back to Atlanta to go to one of his children's t-ball games or like coach pitch games, whatever the age the kid is. And he was like there. And then the next day he flew back to wherever city the Braves were playing in and went through all the protocol and was tested and played the game the next day. It was a pretty remarkable story that during a pandemic he did that. But he had an amazing season as well. After fighting for his life last spring. So great stories across the board, and I think that you couldn't have gone wrong, and they certainly did not.
Yeah, and Dylan, you and I can both attest to this as Mets fans. Freddie Freeman is the one guy in a close game. He comes up and you're like, oh no. Like he might not hit a home run, but he almost always comes up with the big hit, particularly against the Mets bullpen. And it's just, you see it and you're like, oh, not this guy again. Yeah, he honestly scares me even more than, Acuna or Juan Soto or like any of these young guys. Maybe not Juan Soto. Juan Soto scares me quite a lot. But like any of these talented young guys who are in the NL East right now, he scares me as much, if not more, than any of those people in a big spot. He's just that good. Like he's so consistent, and he's going to get that big hit. So he gets his
eventually.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's uncanny, quite frankly. But yeah, I am happy for him. Aside from that, getting his first career Most Valuable Player award, more than deserving. He's been one of the most consistent players in the league over the past few years. Let's move over to the Cy Young now. It was Shane Bieber in the American League. Pretty much no contest in the AL. Shane Bieber, a 1.63 ERA, 122 strikeouts in 12 games this season. Easily beat out Kenta Maeda and Hyunjin Ryu for that honor. In the National League, it was free agent to be Trevor Bauer after he pitched to a 1.73 ERA for the Cincinnati Reds. He beat out Yu Darvish. He also beat out Jacob deGrom, who was denied his third straight Cy Young award. And guys, it's Bauer in the National League, which is, I think, the story here. We all knew it was going to be Shane Bieber of Cleveland in the American League. But guys, Bauer gets the nod in the National League and now heads into free agency on about as high of a horse as you could possibly have.
Yeah, so you talked about how unanimous of a pick, quite literally, Bieber was in the American League. I would argue that Bauer was the obvious choice in the National League. Also, 100 strikeouts, 1.73 ERA, and it's difficult not to want that 3 straight for Jacob deGrom. One thing for being a Mets fan, but also just being a fan of his more than anything else. But you got to give the credit where credit's due, and Trevor Bauer just had a better 60 games. Now, would I say I would take him in a Game 7 right now over Jacob deGrom? I don't think I would. I think I'd still take deGrom there. I think we still have to call him the best pitcher in baseball. But this was a well-deserved, obviously for Bieber, that's not even much of a debate at this point. All baseball had Bieber fever. But I think Bauer is maybe not as obvious of a choice, but I would say just as clearly the winner in the senior circuit.
Yeah, I would agree that this was a pretty obvious choice. As a Yankee fan, it stinks to not see Garrett Cole in the top 3 after paying him all the money, but that's why he's got 7 more years to do it. Excuse me. But as for Trevor Bauer, yeah, I do think it was the obvious choice, and it stinks for deGrom. How could you not be a fan of his? Just carries himself the right way. Not that Bauer doesn't, but to not get that 3 in a row, but the obvious choice. And now we're going to talk about Stevie Cohen, but it's possible that the Mets still have 3 consecutive Cy Youngs on there in their lineup come April. So certainly possible. But yeah, I do think that they're the obvious choices. And I think in a 12-game season, what Bieber and Bauer put out was unmatched with any other pitcher. Outside of, Game 1 against the Yankees, Bieber was unhittable.
Yeah, and you talked about the possible Mets rotation, so I'm not going to steal this from you guys because I know you guys are going to talk about it. But you think about if they go out and somehow swing a contract for Trevor Bauer, you're looking at the last 3 Cy Young awards. You've got Marcus Stroman, Noah Syndergaard coming back midseason. That's not bad. That's not bad at all. I think you would take that after what they had last year with. Frankly, one of the worst rotations in baseball. I would say the worst rotation in baseball outside of Jacob deGrom. If Jacob deGrom were not to exist, that rotation would have been in complete shambles, even more so than it already was. So, yeah, hats off to those guys. You get a 1.63 and a 1.73. That's pretty hard to beat those numbers. And I think those two pretty deserving. And I'll be fascinated to see where Trevor Bauer's free agency takes it. This guy is a lightning rod. He engenders very strong opinions one way or the other. There have been times, I'll be honest, where I really have not cared for Trevor Bauer, but hard to deny his talent. And somebody is going to go out and in an offseason where spending will be down. I think he's one of the few guys I could still see some team throwing a lot of money at him, whether that's the Mets, whether that's somebody else. I don't know who it's going to wind up being, but he's going to be a fascinating piece to watch where he winds up, what that contract winds up being, and who's willing to go out and give him that money. So I think that's another very interesting aspect of Trevor Bauer, not only winning the Cy Young, but where he goes in this offseason. But he does go into the offseason having won the Cy Young, and now we get to our other baseball headline, which is history in Major League Baseball in the Miami Marlins' new front office. They have hired a new GM, and it is longtime executive and most recently senior VP of baseball operations for Major League Baseball, Kim Ng. She is the first woman as a general manager in the sport of baseball. She becomes the Marlins GM after they had something of a cleaning of house after the 2020 season. Ng has previously served as an assistant GM for the Yankees in the late 90s and early 2000s, and later for the Dodgers, where she was from 2002 to 2011. Guys, a historic moment in Major League Baseball. Kim Ng, a baseball lifer, I think it can be said, gets her opportunity, and she becomes the new GM of the Miami Marlins.
And, you know, Jimmy, first off, not only is it historic for baseball, it's historic for all of American professional sports. She's the first woman to hold that position for any of the sports. So that's remarkable. It's also remarkable, you know, in the grand scope of this past week. In the same week, we elected our first female vice president officially of the United States, and the Miami Marlins named Kim Ng the first ever female general manager of a Major League Baseball team, and it can feel very triumphant, like as if we've hit a point. We've hit a point of progression that is wonderful and triumphant and great, but we can't deny the fact that there is still work to be done. Kim Ng is clearly someone with a baseball mind and acumen that this should have happened for her a long time ago. And, you know, and credit to Derek Jeter and the Marlins for finally pulling the trigger. But, you know, I saw a tweet this morning that was talking about how she was in baseball executive positions for longer than Theo Epstein had been alive when he was hired by the Red Sox. So that's I saw that now. I was like, I fact checked it just because I was like, that doesn't even make any sense. But it's completely true. So, you know, hopefully we get to a point where a woman of Ang's stature and acumen and intelligence, specifically for baseball, doesn't have to spend all of this time going to all these other different places just so she could be the general manager of a professional sports team. And hopefully that is something we can take into the future. So it's a wonderful moment, and I'm very hopeful for where this leads next.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think on the baseball side of it, she turns 52 next week. So could be a long-standing relationship between her and the Marlins, and hopefully it leads to great success. I mean, yeah, hats off to the Marlins for making this possible, and congrats to Kim Ng for being the first female general manager in American sports history. It's pretty hard to imagine that was still true as of 3 days ago, that had not been a female general manager in American sports, but it was true. And now Kim Ng has a full offseason ahead of her to improve what was, I mean, yes, we can put an asterisk on it, but a playoff team this year in the Marlins. So on the baseball side of it, certainly a lot to be excited about.
Couple of points I want to make, and then you guys can play me off and move on. It's interesting that one of the words I saw used with this hire was outside the box, because if you were to blindly look at Kim Ng's resume, what she has done in baseball, and just look at the experience, right? Assistant GM for the Yankees from 1998 to 2002, which is the boom period in the history of the Yankees franchise. Assistant GM for the Dodgers, worked in Major League Baseball, has been, in the sport for 30 years. You would not say this was an outside the box hire. You would say that this is about as obvious of a hire as you could possibly make. And that leads me into the point that it is, while groundbreaking that she was hired, a little disconcerting that it took somebody in Kim Ng who is not just qualified, but so clearly overqualified for a role like this, that this is what it took for a team to hire a woman as GM. And yes, it's groundbreaking, and yes, it is a huge deal, and it's so powerful for young women who want to get into not just baseball, but any other sport that is male dominated, and they see someone like Kim Ng and they look at that and say, I can do it. That's a big deal. I'm not discounting that. But if you look at her resume, she should have gotten a GM job in the early 2000s. And I remember when I was first getting into baseball, when I was like 6, 7 years old, and she was coming up for GM vacancies back around like when the Mets hired Omar Minaya. And that was in, 2004, 2005. So that was, she's been around so long, and she's been deserving of this, quite frankly, for so long. And you look at all the, jobs that she's been passed up for, those jobs have probably been turned over 2-3 times by the time she finally got a shot in 2020 as the Marlins GM. So she's the first woman in this job. I don't think she's going to be the last. I don't know if she's going to be successful, because nobody knows, whether or not she's going to be successful, but she deserves the chance to show what she has. Frankly, I also think she deserves the opportunity to fail. I heard a point that John Thompson made, the former head coach of Georgetown, who recently passed away. And he was talking about black head coaches. And it's a similar point that, yes, we deserve the opportunity to get a chance to succeed. But, we also deserve the opportunity that if we don't succeed, if we have a losing record, if we get fired, that it's not a referendum on all of us. In his case, black coaches. In Kim Ng's case, women as top executives, whether it be GMs or presidents of baseball operations. So Kim Ng deserves the chance to succeed. I just hope that she gets the opportunity to fail. And I think that this is a big moment in baseball, and I wish nothing but the best for Kim Ng and the Marlins. But just remember that if it doesn't necessarily work out, it isn't a referendum that, women can't be GMs or some ridiculous thought like that. It'll be because of some other factor. Frankly, with the Marlins organization, if she fails, it might very well not be her fault, because we've seen what happens with that organization as well. So really happy to see that with Kim Ng. She is more than deserving, and I'm happy that she finally, about 10 to 15 years too late, gets her shot to be a GM.
I just want to make a quick point before I know we have to wrap. I think the hire shows how much respect she garners in the positions that she holds. You look at her, the owner who hired her, Derek Jeter, was the player on the team in the 1998-2002 New York Yankees. We know that. The manager of the Marlins, Don Mattingly, they didn't necessarily cross over with the Dodgers, but there's certainly people that worked with both of them. I'm sure that they know each other in some certain situation. Now, she worked for the MLB for the last 9 years, so everybody's probably in some degree worked with her. But I think it does show the respect that she garners in the positions that she's held in the past in baseball, that it was, of all teams, the Jeter and Mattingly-led Marlins that finally pulled the trigger.
Absolutely. And, we have a couple more minutes here. So, and I know the last thing anyone wants to hear is 3 guys talking about a woman's place in sports. But, and it also should be noted that Ng is also the first Asian American to sit in this type of position. But I totally agree with what you were talking about, Jimmy, in terms of being able to fail. Because I think more than anything, let's say you become a manager or a head coach in any sport, there are assistant coaching positions to help you be ready to hit that position. There is nothing in the world that can really prepare you to be the general manager of a sports team. You're either it's going to take time for someone to be good at that who's never done it before, and there's no one more qualified than Eng is, and there's no one who's never been a GM before that I would trust more than her. But we as baseball fans and people who analyze baseball, and there's no doubt there's going to be a very tough magnifying glass on her this season and for the next few seasons to come if she is with Miami for so long. We're going to have to give her time. We're going to have to be patient, and we're not going to, like you were saying, Jimmy, treat this as a thesis of women as sports general managers.
Yeah, it would be completely wrong to do so. So I'll be fascinated to see what happens with the Marlins. They are obviously, this is no fault of Kim Eng. They are a very unpredictable organization in terms of certain practices they've undertaken. So I'll be interested to see what happens there. And Derek Jeter obviously made the final decision on this. I think we could all agree. And we'll see if it works out. But, I think it's great to see just to see her get a shot, because that was my concern, was that she is going to work in baseball all her life. Wants to be a GM, obviously, and doesn't get that chance. So definitely good to see on that front.
Yeah, certainly an historic week in baseball, to say the least. But that concludes this headline segment. Again, thank you to our friend and yours, Jimmy Sullivan, for joining us. He'll be back sporadically throughout the rest of the program, so stick around for at least more of him, but maybe for more of Chris Hennessy and myself here on 1-on-1 New York's longest-running sports call-in show. We'll be back in just a minute or two, so stick around.
Has a brand new YouTube channel. Subscribe to WFUV Sports to catch our simulcast Saturday nights and get notifications so you never miss another show. Miss the show? You can find on-demand segments, interviews, and highlights every week. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. Welcome back. No, but welcome back to 1-on-1 New York's longest-running sports call-in show here on 90.7 FUV, WFUV Sports.org, WFUV.org, Facebook Live, whatever it is that you are joining us from. We are very grateful that you are here. I am Dylan Balsam, along with my partner, Chris Hennessy. And here we are about halfway through the program. And our thanks again to Jimmy Sullivan for doing headlines. You'll see more of him later. And again, also our thanks to Jake Brown, who we talked to earlier from the New York Post. So, Chris, we're halfway through the show. How you feeling?
I feel good, man. I feel awake. I feel like talking about Steve Cohen, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm excited to talk about this, especially with you. As a Yankee fan, I don't have the inside knowledge, emotional attachment, if you will, to the Steve Cohen press conference. However, I know you do. So I ask you this. Grade it on a regular A to F scale. Grade Steve Cohen's press conference.
It's going to be really hard for me not to say an A because he said everything that I wanted to hear in that press conference. There were like 8 periods in what I just said, but but he sang all the right notes. He said exactly the things that I know I speak on behalf of every Mets fan that we wanted to hear, because it was essentially just the opposite of what the thesis of the Wilpons tenure with the Mets has been. So it was wonderful. But thanks for bringing that up, Chris. Let's talk about it. So for those of you who perhaps didn't hear or didn't know, been stuck under your respective COVID pandemic rock, this week the Mets' new owner, Steve Cohen, gave his first official press conference after purchasing the team. And he had a lot to say, Chris. He had a lot to say.
He did. I think that something you have to take away from it is, like, this dude loves the freaking Mets, man. Like, I know a lot of Met fans, right? My grandpa's a Mets fan. I know you and Jimmy and my uncle and 1,000 people, right? And Mets fandom, like, they love the Mets, right? This guy freaking loves the Mets. And that is an awesome, awesome thing to have as your owner. I think when you look at, let's take the Jets, for example, right? The Johnsons, like, they're Jets fans, but, like, they don't get up there and say how much they love the Jets. Even my hockey team, I'm not ever going to say a bad word about the current owners of the New York Islanders because they've done amazing things, but they aren't Islander fans, right? This guy is a Met fan, and his father-in-law is a season ticket holder, and he loves the New York Mets. I think that is really, really cool, because him winning, like, the Mets winning a World Series for him would be like, yeah, it would be this great economic financial boost for his pocket, which doesn't need any more economic or financial boost, but it would be. But also it'd be, for him, the first time since 1986 he saw his favorite baseball team win a World Series. And when you have both of those things in the same person, I think that is really, really special.
Absolutely. That's a great point that you bring up, actually, because, obviously sports is a business, and owning a sports franchise, it's a business thing, and it needs to be business related. But what a lot of people who end up owning sports teams don't understand is that sports is different from any other company that they may own. Like, if the Purdue Chicken Company was, I don't know why I thought of that, but if the Purdue Chicken Company was bought and sold, and the new owner came out and gave a press conference, I don't need him to say, yeah, I'm a big fan of Purdue Chicken. Like, and it'd be great to hear him say that, but it's not necessary that he says that.
Right.
But with sports, it is absolutely, I think, essential that, at least if you're not a fan of the team, you have some kind of emotional attachment to this. This is because we all know that what this franchise, this company, if you will, that is the New York Mets, means a lot more to people than Purdue Chicken.
Yes.
It is truly a lifestyle. We've those of us right here, we've made a whole lifestyle out of it. This is so much more than that. And to see someone who sees it from those eyeballs, because he is a fan, he's a diehard fan, it is so refreshing. It's incredibly refreshing.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to get to a couple clips that Jimmy cut from the press conference, but I find it was probably hard for Jimmy to find just 3 to put into the show. I mean, there were so many great things that he said. And it's exciting. It's 5 years ago, if Trevor, it's not even 5 years ago, last year, right? Garrett Cole's a free agent. There was no talk about him going to the Mets. It was the Yankees, the Angels, the Dodgers, this team, that team. That was pretty much it. The Rangers, I think, were in there, and back to the Astros. Now, it seems like, now maybe this is my New York biases, even though I'm not a Mets fan, pushing through, but it seems like Trevor Bauer is going to go to the Mets. That that they are the leader in the clubhouse to land the biggest pitcher free agent, like somebody, as Jimmy talked about in the last segment, clearly they need. It seems like it's possible that one of 2, George Springer or JT Realmuto, end up in blue and orange, which, if you look back at, Mookie Betts was traded, so it's a little bit different. But if you look back at previous free agencies, the Mets were not in on those guys. Ever since 2008, they really haven't been in on those big guys. right? They got Pedro Martinez, they got Carlos Beltran, but then since then, it hasn't been a lot. So I think that is a really cool thing for the Met fan to say, like, finally, after October, it's still interesting, right? There's still things to get excited about in January, where previously there was not.
Yeah, no, it's a year-round lifestyle, as it is for, we've seen for the Yankees since George Steinbrenner bought them years and years and years and years ago. But so, Chris, you mentioned those clips that Jimmy got from the press conference, and again, our thanks to the wonderful Jimmy Sullivan for grabbing those for us. But let's get to the first one right now, because a big question whenever any owner takes over a sports team is how much say will they have in baseball operations? And Steve Cohen answered that question right away. So let's take a look.
I played Little League once, but that's about it, right? So I'm going to let the professionals, Sandy and, the people we bring in, let them run baseball. I'm sure they'll make recommendations to me, and, it'll be a collaborative effort. But ultimately, they're the experts. And generally, but, I hold people accountable, just like I do in my business at Point 72. And, I ask probing questions, and, I expect reasonable answers, and it'll be a two-way conversation, but ultimately they're the experts.
Wasn't that wonderful?
I mean, what else
feels so I feel like I just watched an episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I'm just so at ease right now, right? It's just namaste. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what you want to hear. I think for the last fill in the number of years, the Mets have had an owner that is very much involved in baseball operations. And I don't want to rag on the Wilpons too much, because they did bring you to a World Series 5 years ago. But I think that what the Mets fan wanted was change more than anything. And you could talk about the change in net worth, and that's certainly something that is very important. But a change in everything was necessary. And the fact that he comes in and says, I'm going to do things very differently from the Wilpons, and I'm going to fire the guy that they hired to do the general manager job in Brody Van Wagenen, I think that's all you really wanted to hear. He can go out and sign every free agent in the world and have a net worth of $18 gazillion and yada, yada, yada. But at the end of the day, it's change that was so necessary. And I think that, I'll relate to the Islanders again. Charles Wall on the team, he did a fine job. He kept them in New York, which was a question for a long time. But when John Ledecky and Scott Malkin came in, it was, what are they going to do that's different from Charles Wall? Well, they're going to build a new arena, which is currently being built, and they're going to play there in 11 months. For the Mets, it was, what is Steve Cohen going to do differently from Jeff and Fred Wilpon? Well, he's going to stay out of the way of baseball operations, run it like a business, like he knows how to do, and he's going to win a World Series. And we're going to get to the World Series bit in a little bit, but he's going to win a World Series, or it's going to be considered a failure in his book.
Yeah. Jerry Seinfeld, who himself is a Mets fan, and people wanted him to buy the team. But something he always talks about when he's talking about, while he was making the sitcom Seinfeld, something he always talks about that he didn't like about making a television show is that there were TV executives that wanted to have a say in what happened in the show. And he was so annoyed that people who weren't funny wanted to have a say in the funny. Mm-hmm. And to me, a bad sports owner, especially one that doesn't really have much of a sports background, is that same thing. Derek Jeter with the Marlins is a different thing, because I don't think anyone's going to argue that guy knows baseball. Right. But if people who don't come from the world of baseball, who try to make decisions about baseball, of course they're going to be the wrong decisions. Of course they're going to be crazy decisions that make no sense and don't turn out right. And I think perhaps what is already Steve Cohen's best quality as an owner is his humility in that perspective. Mm. He knows that he is not a baseball master, as big of a fan of the Mets as he may be. What he wants is to see them win, and he knows what he has to do to have them win. And what he's doing is giving them the money to do so. But he's going to let the baseball people make the baseball decisions, and that is very, very nice to see. Now, let's move on, because we've talked about how Cohen is very clearly a Mets fan, and that perhaps is one of his best qualities as an owner. And speaking of fans, he made it very, very clear in this press conference who he bought this team for, who he was doing this for, and all that different kind of stuff. So let's take a quick look at that.
I'm essentially doing it for the fans. I mean, when I really thought about this, I can make millions of people happy. And what an incredible opportunity that is. And so, that's how I'm thinking about this. I'm not trying to make money here. Okay. Like I have my business at Point 72 and I make money over there. So here it's really about, building something great, building something for the fans, winning. And, I just find this an amazing opportunity and I'm so excited for it.
Oh, how wonderful. Oh, it's really, it is just like we were talking about how refreshing it is to hear someone who has that humility, to also hear someone who cares about the fans like we were talking about. That is such a huge part of this.
Mhm.
And I'm sure that would matter to you in an owner also, Chris.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the fans are how they make the money, right? I mean, even in this coronavirus world, it's still true, right? I mean, you can buy the jersey, you can buy season tickets for next year. I think that at the end of the day, Steve Cohen is here to win a World Series, and that's what he wants to do. He wants to win the Mets a World Series, and he's going to do whatever it takes to do that, and he wants to do it now. And that is how you please the fans, right? I mean, I can ask you and Jimmy, if they win a World Series in 2022, 2023, we'd be pretty freaking happy about it. After a long time of getting to the World Series in 2015, the World Series in 2000, but not really being close to winning those series, losing in 5 both times, you haven't really been close. So I think that it's all you could ask for. And we're going to listen to the next clip where he says what I just articulated. It's all you could possibly ask for in an owner. And the cries of sell the team, were there was no ideal candidate, right? A couple of years ago until Steve Cohen's name was announced. We didn't know who Steve Cohen was until February.
No.
Maybe you did if you were really into, hedge funds and the minority owners of the Mets, and you were, going to ace the minority owners of the Mets category on Jeopardy on Tuesday night or whatever it is. Jimmy probably get that one right. But
That's true.
I think that this is, if you were to concoct a person at that time, 2 years ago, let's say, of I want the Wilpons to sell the team and I want them to sell them to this imaginary person, you're pretty damn close right now.
Yeah. My favorite thing he said in that little clip, the last one we just saw, was he said, I can make millions of people happy. That's such a wonderful thing to hear. It makes it seem like this was not a business transaction as much as it was that this is this guy's passion project. He said he's not here to make money. He's here to do what he wants to do, and that is help his favorite team win a championship. And any owner could talk about making the fans happy. What's going to make the fans happy is winning. And he is set out on doing that in any way that he can help happen. And it's incredibly refreshing. So, speaking of the winning, let's go to our last clip real quick that we have here, where Cohen makes it very clear the timeline he has set for his success in the opening part of his tenure as the owner of the New York Mets. Take a look.
Only one team wins the World Series every year, right? So that's a pretty high bar.
Mm-hmm.
But if I don't win a World Series in the next 3 to 5 years, I'd like to make it sooner. Then obviously, I would consider that slightly disappointing.
Wow. It's incredibly ambitious. But, and we asked Jake Brown about this earlier when he was on the show. But let me ask you right now, Chris, does that seem like a reasonable timeline to you?
I think so. I think what Jake said is right in the sense that they have a great core of players, right? You have Pete Alonso and Dom Smith and Jake DeGrom and Noah Syndergaard, Michael Conforto, and the list goes on. And if they are able to trade for Francisco Lindor and sign Trevor Bauer, for example, there's no reason they can't win the National League East next year. The National League East isn't that strong. I know the Nats just won the World Series, but they lost a couple of pieces. The Phillies should be better than they were, and we'll see what the Marlins are. And obviously the Braves. I mean, the Braves are a great team, so maybe they'll lose to the Braves. But they could certainly get the second spot. in the National League East. And so to me, there's no reason why that's not realistic. Lindor and Bauer make this team better. And then you go, who is the free agents next year in the New York Jets, right? If they trade for Lindor, they're probably not going to get Corey Seager, which is fine for me. But I think that with the players, the caliber of players that have already been linked to the Mets via the rumor mill, if half of them come to the New York Mets, a quarter of them come to the New York Mets, I think you're in a really good position here to challenge the Braves for the NL East title. And look, the Dodgers are good, the Braves are good, but why not? You had the best pitcher, if one of, if not the best pitcher in baseball. So why not?
I think what's even more important in that sense is, even if it's, who cares what number of these players end up coming to the Mets, the fact that not only are the Mets going to be able to go after them, but these players want to play for the New York Mets is incredible. Like, within less than a week, Steve Cohen has created an environment that Major League Baseball's players are being driven towards. The fact that that, like you said earlier, that we're even able to mention Trevor Bauer's name as the reigning Cy Young Award winner, as a potential New York Met. I mean, I think the Mets have lost more Cy Young Award winners than they have gained. But here's the thing. Here's the most important thing. We talked about their core of players, and they're a very good core of players. I don't think anyone in baseball is going to deny that. Pete Alonso, Michael Conforto, the list goes on. But they also play in New York. This is the biggest media market in the world. The Yankees aren't just pulling money out of the air. Maybe they have a little money themselves, but the reason they're able to be the cash cow that they are as a franchise is because they play in New York. And the fact that the Mets weren't able to hold themselves up to that same standard, I don't think has anything to do with them as a franchise. I think it was a problem with the ownership. And now that there is such a changing of the guards, that it doesn't seem like we're going to have to worry about that in the same way we've had to before. That this is a clear environment that players want to play for. They're going to want to come and play for it. It is just incredibly refreshing. It is a whole new spin on the idea of being a Mets fan. The whole idea of Mets fandom has altered within a week's time. I can't remember the last time I was this excited in the month of November for the upcoming New York Mets season. This is, like Jake Brown said earlier, this is the best time, at least that I can remember. And I'm not that old, but this is the best time that I can remember to be a New York Mets fan. But that will wrap up this segment about Steve Cohen and his newly bought New York Mets. Chris, thanks for letting me talk for a little bit there. I appreciate it. We'll be back in just a little bit. We're going to be talking some college football when we return in just a couple of minutes. Stick around.
One on One has a brand new YouTube channel. Subscribe to WFUV Sports to catch our simulcast Saturday nights and get notifications so you never miss another show. Miss the show? You can find on-demand segments, interviews, and highlights every week. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. WFUV is the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. Keep it locked right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org to catch every Fordham basketball game this year. We'll take you through an extraordinary season with live play-by-play and in-depth pregame and postgame analysis. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Welcome back. One-on-one New York's New York's longest running sports call-in show is One-on-One. 90.7 WFUV, WFUV.org, WFUVSports.org, Facebook Live, blah, 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 blah. I sound like a vampire talking like that. But we are glad that you are joining us. It is midnight 46, as we say here at the Fort Ham. But my name is Dylan Balsamo, along with my partner Chris Hennessy for this show. And we're having a pretty good time, wouldn't you say, Chris?
You're insane. Yes, we are. Yes, we are. Yes, we are. Of course, it's always a pleasure to be in the presence of the great Dylan Balsamo. No doubt.
Oh, I mean that towards you. I truly do. I said that oddly, but let's move on. So let's talk a little bit about what Saturdays are all about. We all know this. Saturdays are about college football. We're right in the midst of the season, and a rather odd season 2020 is, obviously. Right, Chris?
Yes, absolutely. And we talked about it a little bit in the open. Only one of the top 5 teams playing today, and 3 of them because of the coronavirus. I mean, it's not great. I mean, it just doesn't sit well in my stomach. Like, I'll be full disclosure, I'm a Notre Dame fan. As is Dylan. So it felt good to beat Clemson last week, and they play BC today. And as you're listening, you know how it ends. We do not. And my hope is that they finish the season and Notre Dame's able to go to the college football playoff and kind of ward off those ghosts of the past couple of times they've been in that position, right? They get crushed by Clemson, they get crushed by Alabama. But if I'm going to be completely honest with you, Dylan, I am not optimistic. As we sit here today, you have the number 1 team, Alabama, get their game canceled, coronavirus against LSU. Number 3, Oklahoma State. Ohio State University gets their game canceled against the University of Maryland. Texas A&M, number 5 team in the country, postponed, excuse me. Some of these are postponed, some of these are canceled. It's hard to keep track. Georgia.
I believe most, at least, there are at least 6 games with ranked teams that are postponed.
Right.
They're definitely postponed.
And then the Big Ten games are the ones that are canceled, but everybody else is saying postponed. So the Ohio State game canceled. Everything else postponed. Alabama, Auburn, Texas A&M, Coastal Carolina, and Georgia. 5 ranked teams impacted by the coronavirus right now, plus Ohio State 6. So why are we still doing this? Like, what are we doing? Like, the worst part about it to me is that, let's take the Texas A&M game, Texas A&M Tennessee game, just as an example. Not picking on the 2 schools, not really even picking on the SEC, just for an example. If that game were to be played in Tennessee today, there would have been a certain number of fans there. 5,000, 7,000. I don't know. Every school is different. So if it was at Texas A&M, as we saw in the earlier game against, I think it was Florida, there'd be 25,000 people there, but it's not. It's at Tennessee. So let's say there'd be 10,000 people there. It's kind of a lot. With a positive case on the field. And if you look at last week, Saturday night, I know you were up watching it. I was up watching it. Double overtime. Notre Dame wins the game. Going crazy. I look at the TV, and there's like 5,000 people on the field. Like, what in the world is going on? Like, why? Like, why? Just like, why are we playing college? I love college football. I do.
Yeah.
I do love college football, and I hope Notre Dame wins a national championship this year. But if I'm being completely honest, the chances of that happening are very slim, and the chances of there being no national champion are increasing by the day.
Yeah. I've been saying this for a few weeks now, really since the beginning of football season, so more than a few weeks. But we were very lucky back in July to start to be getting sports back,
right?
In whatever form we could get. You know, the NBA, most of the teams went down there into the bubble. The NHL went right into their bubble-type playoffs. Major League Baseball happened in a more condensed form. Obviously, you weren't playing teams from across the country until the playoffs. It feels like when football season started, we got really greedy with sports. And I've been saying this for a few weeks now, but it feels like once we got to football, we expected all of this to be over by now. We as just regular private citizens. And so we like to pretend that there's nothing wrong when clearly there's something wrong.
Yeah. without a doubt. And I think that the NFL, if you take the NFL angle, it was too many people to put in a bubble, which I understand that. Like, I get it.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, they should have been in a bubble. But they're going to say it was too many people, too many logistics to possibly bubble all 32 teams. Fine. They're going to have to bubble the playoffs. I mean, we're getting closer. They keep making announcements about the playoffs. They haven't said anything about a bubble. But let's be real here. They're going to have to bubble the playoffs.
Yeah.
College football, on the other hand, like the NFL seemed doable, right? You can kind of say to the players, like, please don't go out, even though I saw the picture of Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley. Please don't go anywhere. Stay inside and we'll play football, and you'll get paid millions of dollars to do it. With college football, it just seems so much more unrealistic because I'm at home. You can speak to it from experience. The college experience is extraordinarily different right now. Like for every single student on campus, regardless of the of athlete status. At Fordham, we had our basketball team just get out of quarantine yesterday or today, something like that.
I think it was yesterday. I think it was yesterday.
Whatever it was, this weekend. They just exited quarantine because of a positive test that was within the team somewhere. They didn't say where, but somewhere. So it impacts a school that is as small, as central as Fordham. If you look at a school like Alabama, Tennessee, I mean, you could list off all these giants, Ohio State, all these giant schools that are having these coronavirus problems right now. Arizona State, they're gigantic schools, huge. And it just doesn't seem realistic to say to the 53 or it's more than that members of the football team, stay inside and like do your best to like not get the coronavirus because they can't at the end of the day really control it when they got to go to class. So like they can't control if they get the corona. Like the NFL, they have a little bit more control over their actions. When college football, they really don't. So college football never seemed like the best idea to me, and now it's just being proven, unfortunately, right.
Yeah. So, and I'll say this: I don't want to bring quote unquote politics into this, but it's worth talking about. That this week, the president-elect Joe Biden, his COVID advisor has advised that what happens next for the United States as the holidays inch near and people aren't going to want to do this, but what's best is a 4 to 6 week lockdown and shutdown of everything again, like March all over again. And of course, now that we're in the thick of it, I think it was easier. It's easier to do this at the beginning of baseball season, honestly, than it is for in the middle of football season, just because of how we treat the sports. But people aren't going to want to do that. People are not going to want to let that happen. But I don't know about you, but my time, at least in quarantine at home, which is probably going to happen again soon, that whole time becomes its own type of transcendental meditation on the place sports has in our society and our existence. And that, it's great, but there are a lot more things and a lot more people I care about a lot more than the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Yeah,
absolutely. And that lockdown, that is probably going to have to come regardless of who's in charge, because of just the striking increase of numbers, is going to impact the football seasons just like it impacted the hockey and basketball seasons. And then it's going to impact hockey and basketball again. Yeah. MLB, yes, they had to play a 60-game season, but they are skating through this pandemic, man. I mean, they were in the off season. Now they're in the off season again. Obviously, they had to play a shortened season, but they crowned a champion. They moved on, and now everybody else is going to have to stop in the middle of the season again, or just before it starts for hockey and basketball. So I don't know. It's concerning what's happened in college football because I think you look at Dan Mullen as kind of the poster. That's a little bit unfair because Florida's out of quarantine now, but Dan Mullen, after that A&M Florida game, was like, oh, well, clearly the fans that are here at the Texas A&M Stadium impacted this game, which Florida lost. So I would like a full crowd at Florida next week when they played, or were supposed to play LSU, I think. And then he and like half the team got the virus. So it's like, you can't say that. Like, you can't do that because now your team has the coronavirus. And like, I'll be honest, I was waiting with bated breath to hear that Notre Dame was going to have to not play this game against BC because there was 5,000 people standing right around the team. I think it was interesting. I saw something that said, I can't remember. It was Brian Kelly said to the team, look, we can win this game, right? Like we're a good team. And if we win, they're probably going to storm. So just run as fast as you can. Just get out of there because like we can't have this happen. And now coaches are taking extreme cautions to try and finish the season that at the end of the day, when I don't know if they're going to.
Yeah. And as they rightfully should be taking those precautions. But, you know, we have a couple more minutes before we go to another headline segment with our friend Jimmy Sullivan. But before we do that, we have a few more minutes. And, you know, like we've been talking about for this whole segment and even before this, Notre Dame is the only one of the top five teams in the rankings right now that will be playing a game this weekend as we sit here and tape this for you. They're going to be playing Boston College. So let me ask you, Chris, this is really the time where Notre Dame's going to get to show themselves on the national stage with no other interruptions because none of the other top five teams are playing. How much does Notre Dame need to beat Boston College by tonight in order to make people say, "Oh, maybe we should make them the number one team here"? What do you think?
I don't think they're going to be the number one team. I think it's going to take a lot to unseat Alabama. Look, they can absolutely they can win by 35 points. I mean, BC's really good though. They have a good defense.
Yeah.
So if they win, let's say 28-7, they'll be the number two team again. I don't see a way in which Alabama, because they don't play today, loses the number one seed. Because I think like what we talked about in the open, the playoff committee is going to have to determine how they rate coronavirus games and games missed. Alabama probably would have beaten LSU by 4 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns, 5, a lot of points because LSU's not that good. So do you say, all right, we believe that Alabama would have won the game, so we'll just like pretend like they won and move on? Or do you say like it's going to impact them negatively because they have less wins than Notre Dame at the end of the season? Because the game probably isn't going to be played. And if it is, who knows like when it will be. So it's a lot to think about. I don't think right now, though, they're going to unseat Alabama because of a coronavirus situation.
Understood. So we have probably maybe 90 seconds here. You got a quick prediction for what happens tonight or today?
I think they'll win pretty handily. BC has a good defense, but I liked what I saw from Ian Book on Saturday. I don't say that a lot. I'm not actually an Ian Book believer as much as I like Notre Dame. I don't think that he's that great, but he played a really good game. The game I'm going to be watching more, if I'll be watching Notre Dame BC, but the Masters will be on at the same time, so I gotta divide my interest. You will be watching more is Wisconsin Michigan. I think that Michigan is a really interesting case study in like recruiting almost. Like they thought they recruited this great class and now they kind of stink. It's very odd what's happening to Jim Harbaugh and the Michigan Wolverines. They're playing Wisconsin, who's 1-0, and they missed 2 games because of the coronavirus. So to me, that's really interesting. Is Wisconsin for real? Is Michigan really that bad? That's on 7:30. So that one is more interesting to me because I think Notre Dame will handle the business correctly.
Understood, and I'd agree with you there. You mentioned the Masters. We're going to be talking about that in just a second when Jimmy Sullivan, Boy Genius, rejoins us for another headline segment. We will do that in just a second, so stick around. This is One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show.
To follow WFUV Sports on all of our social media platforms. At WFUV Sports on Twitter, at WFUV_sports on Instagram, and WFUV Sports on Facebook and YouTube. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org.
Another round of headlines. My guys Chris and Dylan will join me in a moment. 1:02 a.m. Got another about an hour now. Make that 57 minutes with you here on One, taking you up until 2 a.m. Let's talk some Masters. Chris, you've got the Masters polo on today, so no better time to talk about the Masters than November 15th of 2020. And we will start with the betting favorite entering this week's tournament, but a guy who has really disappointed in the first couple of rounds, and that's Bryson DeChambeau. He made the cut at even par for the tournament, and that was the cut line by the skin of his teeth. He gets to play the weekend. He had made some audacious comments earlier in the week saying that Augusta was playing as a par 67 course for him. Please note, Augusta is not a par 67 course. It is a par 72. By Bryson's own standards, he's currently 10 over. Chris, you're wearing the polo. I will go to you first. Bryson DeChambeau talked a really good game heading into the Masters after having won the U.S. Open at Winged Foot in September, but an incredible disappointment for him over the first couple of rounds. He's hit the ball far. He has not hit the ball straight, and he enters the weekend hobbling at just even par.
Yeah. I love golf. I'm not the biggest Bryson fan. I never have been even before the extreme weight gain, but I think he is fascinating to watch. And I will not lie, I was rooting for Matt Wolff to win the U.S. Open, and he did not. And Bryson wins by 6. But I think what happened, and he on Golf Channel this morning was like, I feel dizzy, I feel sick, I got tested for the virus, I don't have the virus, but I feel sick. Okay, whatever. But I think that he does talk a big game, and that's why the attention is on him all the time, more even so than he hits it really far, because a lot of guys hit it really far. Matt Wolff hits it almost as far, if not further, than Bryson. You know, multiple times at Wingfoot. But what attracts all of us to Bryson is, yes, he looks literally insane. He looks like a brick house. But he also talks about it all the time, and he gets the media attention, and we talk about it, we talk about it. And then he has to back it up, which he did at Wingfoot, and he's not doing now. The par 67 remark was right when I knew I was not going to be rooting for him once again. I was like, come on, dude. Like, that's insanity. Like, even if you think that, you can't just say that. So, it's ridiculous, and he is, yes, 10 over par on his own number, but it's interesting because he's interesting, and what's he going to change between now and April when he comes back? That's going to be fascinating.
Interesting is certainly a word to use for a guy like Bryson. I think when it comes to personalities, we talked a little bit, you did, Chris, about just that kind of personality, and it can keep you as a golf fan from rooting for somebody. But it would also perhaps make someone who's not a golf fan tune in.
Oh, absolutely.
So I'm never against those type of people. The big personalities in sports. It's part of why we tune in. So I'm never against it. I think Bryson set his own expectations too high, and I think when you do that, you're bound to crumble. I think if you come in a favorite, I think you need to take that as a chip on your shoulder.
Yeah.
And he didn't really. And I think that's really why he's underperformed at this point. It's a little disappointing to see, but it's the reality of it. And and it makes you question his game to this point. But other than that, there really isn't too much to say about it. It's just a little disappointing.
It's also interesting, the dichotomy of Bryson when you think about what he did over quarantine. Because beforehand, he was kind of your typical golfer. He wasn't huge. He was in good shape, but he wasn't, this big guy. And he admittedly during quarantine ate about 3,000 to 3,500 calories a day, bulked up, and now he's one of the hardest hitters on tour. The problem is when you hit the ball as far as he does, and his driving distance well over 300 yards. But when you hit it as far as he does, when you miss, you miss. And that's what we've seen out of him. Like he's put some balls over the first couple of rounds in places that I didn't even know existed at Augusta.
Well, because there was patron tents.
Right. That's the other interesting thing about this tournament. Like these golfers are hitting the ball, and it's like, oh yeah, if he hit it there, usually it would hit the gallery. But right. It's not, because there's nothing there, because there's nobody there. So it's fascinating. And when these guys miss left and almost tended onto the other fairway, as Bryson did the other day, it's just fascinating to watch when you see something like that. And to watch it without patrons, it's very jarring to hear. And we'll get into Tiger Woods next. But when you hear the introduction on the tee from Florida, Tiger Woods, and nothing, that's really jarring.
Yeah,
like, it was a little alarming.
I was watching it when he teed off. It was, 4 please, now driving, the defending Masters champion Tiger Woods. And you could hear a pin drop. And that was the first moment where I was like, wow, this is really going to stink. Like, this is not good. Yeah. But it has been great. I can't lie about it. It's been fantastic. It is literally my favorite day of the entire year. So I can't complain.
And Jimmy, it should be noted, I was also eating about 3,500 calories a day during quarantine. It was in light of nothing.
Mostly in Reese's peanut butter cups, though, not in steak.
Yeah. That's a whole separate debate. But real quick, what's everyone's favorite candy? This is real quick.
Oh, Kit Kat.
Kit Kat, good answer.
Reese's.
Chris? Reese's. Mine is one of those two. I go back and forth. But Take 5 is above them. Keep going, Jimmy.
All right. So apropos of nothing, Bryson DeChambeau struggling at the Masters, probably not going to win it. Somebody who is a little more in contention, I say a little more, is Tiger Woods. He also made the cut. He's playing the weekend, defending Masters champion. As we talk right now, currently sitting at 4 under for the tournament, several shots back of the lead. I'm a big Tiger guy. As you guys know, I was ecstatic when he won the Masters last year. Guys, I will turn it to you. Chris, I'll go to you first again. It's a faint chance for Tiger, but it is a chance. Do you think there's a possibility that he can leap back up and be in contention for the lead on Sunday so I can deck out my Sunday red tomorrow morning?
He had a great first round. One of his best in Masters history, if not his best, in his time at Augusta. But his second round was not that great. I think he shot 1 under, and coming out of the restart, because they had to blow the horn because of darkness on Friday night, start again on Saturday morning. He was just okay this morning. He was just okay. And now he's in the third round, and he again is just okay. So ever since he won the Masters, which is now, remember, you think that's a year ago. No, it's 19 months ago. He hasn't been fantastic. He's been good, but not fantastic. However, the Masters is the ultimate study in course recognition and course knowledge, and that's what he has more than anybody in the field. Him and Phil. So that is helping him move through these rounds, but he's not as sharp as he was on Thursday. And it seems like a long shot that he's going to win, especially because if I flip over to the leaderboard right now, it's 1:11 p.m. on Saturday. Dustin Johnson is 4 under through 4 holes in the third round. Sung J M, John Rahm, Abe Answer, Justin Thomas all tied for second. There's no this is true in every Masters because it's the hardest field to get into in golf. But there's no Fugazi people between him and the top, right? It's all past champions, winners on tour, top 50, because that's what the criteria is. And there are some big hits, some really top-notch players in the top 10. All those guys I just mentioned, plus more, Matsuyama, Cantlay, McIlroy, Fleetwood, all above him. So I don't see a way he wins. But he's proven me wrong before, so I wouldn't out of the question, but I am not picking him to win at this stage.
Yeah, Chris, you said most everything that I wanted to articulate myself, with the fact that I'm not thinking of him in terms of winning this. It's just too. This has been a very good tournament to this point, and the competition is just so good right now. He could climb a little bit up that leaderboard, but there's 25 guys he's going to have to better as of right now. As we sit here, he's tied for 22nd place, I believe, on the leaderboard. It's just too much. Like Chris was saying, everybody on that leaderboard is damn good. I just don't see a scenario where, I like Tiger too, and I love the comeback story that was his that was his Masters win 19 months ago. But it just, I think after a triumphant win like that, we will tend to put someone like Tiger back on the pedestal we had thought of him before, when that's just, especially at this point, it's just not feasible. I wouldn't put money on it.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about Tiger. And I think back to watching that Masters last year, and obviously there were more than 10 years of distance between the U.S. Open in 2008, where he won the playoff for his 14th major, and that Masters last year, which he won for major number 15. And obviously everything that happened in between with the public scandal and the injuries that he has dealt with, which posed and continue to pose threats to his career. And in watching that Masters last year, it similarly in a way to watching Nicklaus in '86, you're sitting there watching it with the knowledge like, hey, this might be it. Like, this might be his last best shot at winning a major. Because we've seen him at some of the other events not do as well. And as you said, Chris, he has the institutional knowledge of Augusta, just being there every year, where you have to respect what he can do there. And he always seemed to do better, even in that 10-year dead period of not really winning, where he could be horrible at the other majors and he would come to Augusta and have a shot. Mm-hmm. And I think that's about where his career is now. You think about that Masters last year and how hard it was for him to come back from everything and go in and win that tournament. And I wonder if it didn't take something out of him for the rest of that year, because he didn't do very well in the rest of the majors. And, he comes back this year, kind of a, up and down performances in the majors. Augusta is actually doing relatively well, considering, but, probably not going to win. But it's good to have him back. And, I personally, not to wax poetic here, will cherish that Masters last year for the rest of my life. Because if that is the last major he won, I'll sit there knowing that I enjoyed it to the fullest, knowing that everything that he had come back from was ultimately worth it in that one tournament.
Absolutely. And Jimmy, I will say this also, to circle back really to Bryson in this sense. I think, in those 10 plus years in between Tiger's 08 win and his incredible win 19 months ago, like we've been saying, where, a public scandal, one of the most public sports scandals really since OJ. He was the butt of every Letterman monologue for like 5 years. I knew you'd like that, Jimmy. I think that the biggest crux in his game, and ended up being in his golf game, public scene aside, was the high expectations he put on himself that just at that point were no longer feasible to imagine in himself. The way we kind of saw that with Bryson this week, where I remember very distinctly this happening more than once, where Tiger talking to the press, and the press were asking him, what do you expect from yourself this weekend? And he would say, first, and there'd be chuckles. And I think that is, we talked about Bryson DeChambeau earlier. I think it's a parallel there. And I think Tiger came to a point where he realized that can't be him anymore. And then the chip got on his shoulder, and that's why he was able to win last year. Mm-hmm. But that's an important factor, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I mean, last year was amazing, without a doubt. I never thought I'd see that again in my life. I mean, I very vaguely remember Torrey Pines, but not as well as other people do, obviously. And that is something I never, ever even remotely considered ever seeing in my life. But there it was. And he put himself after Thursday in a position to do it again, but doesn't look like it's coming to fruition this week.
So we'll see what happens there. Before we wrap up this segment, I have to put you guys on the spot. I'll put myself on the spot too. As we sit here, a round to go, we look at the leaderboard. Some big names on it: Dustin Johnson, Jon Rahm, Justin Thomas, and other guys with maybe less name recognition, but guys who have been playing really well as of late. Up near the top, Abraham Ancer, Hideki Matsuyama, Tommy Fleetwood, Patrick Reed, who won the Masters a couple of years ago. And then you go down a little bit to Rory McIlroy and Paul Casey, who had the great round one, has slipped a little bit since. Brooks Koepka in the top 20. Guys, Dylan, I'll start with you this time. As we look at it, who are you taking to win the green jacket in this most peculiar of years in 2020?
The green jacket, right? So, like we were talking about when we were discussing Tiger, the competition in this tournament right now is incredibly intense. This is a murderer's row of great golfers, and it's for that reason that I think that a lot of people who are farther down the rankings than they'd like to be, which I guess is everybody but Dustin Johnson, is going to have trouble succeeding, at the very least, the person right above them, let alone the people above that. So it is for that reason mainly, but also just because I'm a fan of his and I'm an admirer of his, that I think it's very hard to bet against Dustin Johnson, obviously. He is as good for golf as someone like Tiger, because he's got that star power, but not with as much personality, I don't think. And that usually makes for a really clutch athlete, as we've seen across all sports. So I'm going to take Dustin Johnson for that multitude of reasons.
All right, I have two stats for you if you're a numbers person. 7 of the last 9 Masters champions have won their first major in that Masters. The only 2 would be Tiger Woods and Bubba Watson, who won the second green jacket for her second major. And 32 of the last 33 Masters champions have come from the top 10 after 36 holes. That leads you to Sungjae Im, Jon Rahm, Abe Ancer, Sebastian Munoz, Hideki Matsuyama, Cam Smith, C.T. Pan, Patrick Cantlay as your possibilities, if you're a numbers person, to win the Masters. Thought those were interesting stats. However, I'm going to go completely against them and pick Justin Thomas, who had a great Thursday, an okay Friday, and is playing decently well so far. I like Justin Thomas a lot. I think he hits the ball a long way, and he's a really solid player. It's amazing to me still that he only has 1 major championship, and I will be picking Justin Thomas to drape the green jacket on Sunday evening.
Fascinating, because Dustin Johnson has been the best player here at the Masters. I think that's that's pretty clear as we, sit here and, look at the leaderboard right now. But there's a label that follows him at majors where he'll have a 54-hole lead or he'll be in contention and just fall off the map. I remember before you got to Fordham, Chris, we covered the U.S. Open 2 years ago at Shinnecock, and DJ had a share of the 54-hole lead. Shinnecock was playing brutally hard that week. And we went into Sunday kind of by default thinking, all right, well, he's going to pull it together. He's the best player here. Didn't wind up happening. He didn't have a good round. Brooks Koepka wound up coming through. And he's always the guy throughout his career who's been close in majors. You can list them off, but he's been on the door and just not able to do it. I think about 2015 at Chambers Bay, where if he 2-putts, he's going to a playoff on Monday where he could very well win, and instead he 3-putts from 10 feet. But the law of averages says that sometimes you're just too good, and this guy's too good to have one major in his career, and that's where he's at right now. He had the U.S. Open at Oakmont in 2016. I think it was Oakmont.
That's correct.
Oakmont in 16, his only major. He's above that, I really believe. And I think the way he's been hitting the ball all week, Augusta's playing easier than it usually does. But I'm going to take Dustin Johnson. I like the way he's playing. And I hate to say things like he's due, but he's kind of due. And I think he puts some of those demons to bed this week. And I think Dustin Johnson wins his first green jacket.
Understood. So those are our picks for this weekend. By the time you listen or watch this, you'll probably know a little bit more than we do right now, but that's just the reality of pandemic. So again, thank you to Jimmy Sullivan for another stellar headline segment. When we come back, our friends Emmanuel Ribari and Jackson Heil are going to take over for our off the air segment as they interview WFUV Sports alum Mike Yam. So they will be on the other side of this break. We will see you in just a little bit. Stick around.
To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Joining us on this edition of the Off the Air podcast is a new member of the team over at NFL Network, also a WFUV Sports alum. It's Mike Yam. Mike, thanks for being with us.
Awesome to be with you guys. Anytime I hear Fordham or WFUV, I perk up, I flash back to the good old days. So it's a pleasure to be with you guys, and I appreciate the invite.
So, Mike, you went from the Pac-12 network to NFL Network this year, and it's been a crazy year for so many people. Your journey, no different. What have the last few months been like in your mind?
To be honest with you, you're right. I try to have better perspective and not just think about what's been happening in my life, because this has been a lot of people. I mean, it was tough. I was given a heads up back in April that after basically, almost 9 years at Pac-12 Network, that my contract wasn't going to get renewed, and it was financial reasons. And I was surprised that actually happened, to be honest with you. I didn't anticipate it, but as the COVID situation has sort of unfolded, you see all these networks that have been struggling financially. And it's not just our industry, and you guys know this. I mean, there's at the peak, I guess it was like almost 40 million people in our country that were dealing with unemployment. So it was nerve wracking, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't lean in on relationships and friendships that I made when I was at Fordham, in different spots along the way. And I think that was the one really telling thing about the last few months for me is, one, a lot of people are willing to help, and two, relationships, they really matter. And I was extremely fortunate to find a spot at NFL Network. A lot of it was because of my time at ESPN, and I've been freelancing as well with Sirius XM Radio, which was oddly enough kind of my first job out of college, my first real job out of college when I left Fordham. And I've been doing some really cool things with Intel Sports on a new project called TrueView, which if you're watching NFL games, you see sort of like a unique camera looks, 360 cameras. So been doing stuff with those guys, and that's been great. And you're just trying to stay busy in a wild time.
Mike, you talked about perspective and leaning people you care about the most during this process. What would you say is the biggest thing you learned about yourself going through all of this? Because obviously, like you mentioned, it's such a difficult time for you and for everyone. What's the biggest thing that you thought that you found out about yourself that you may not have known before the pandemic?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually haven't really thought about that aspect of the last 9 months or so, because it's just not normal, right? Like, I've went through a situation where I didn't anticipate leaving a network that I was at when it launched back in 2012. I was comfortable and I liked my lifestyle in San Francisco, and that gets pulled, the rug gets pulled out from under you. And that's hard, man. Like, that is not an easy situation. I'd be lying if I told you guys, hey, it was great. I my contract was up in August, and, next thing I know, a couple of weeks later, I'm at NFL Network. You take the 50,000 foot view of it, and I guess in some ways, like, that is kind of what happened, but it's a struggle, man. It was tough. The anxiety that's associated with it, the ups and downs, the uncertainty. I mean, there's still uncertainty right now. I don't know where I'm going to be living. My lease is up in January. I don't even know if I'm going to be in San Francisco. So, and there's a lot of life stuff that pops up. I didn't think, and maybe the answer to your question is I'm trying to buy some time to figure out what I've actually learned about myself, but maybe the one thing that really stands out is this ability that I didn't know that I had to at least take a step back and be okay with the unknown. When I was at Fordham, guys, I got to campus and I thought I was pre-med. I was convinced I was going to be a pediatrician. That was my goal in life, and ended up, clearly it didn't work out for me in that avenue, but I've always been sort of a control freak and needing to know what's next, and the unknown has never been a comfortable situation for me. So I think the one thing that I've learned is maybe have a better outlook and just sort of kind of relax here. I mean, it's been tough, and I've been freaking out at times, about a lot of those uncertainties that I know are still ahead. But I think over the last couple of weeks or so, last couple of months, I've just sort of said to myself, you know what, like, this is what it is. I can't control it, and I'm just going to try to worry about the things that I can control, which is the cheesiest line ever. It's the worst thing that anyone ever tells you. And you guys are on campus. You're going to be looking for an on-air job pretty soon after you graduate. And, you'll hear everyone will say, oh, if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. And I wanted to, like, pull my hair out when I heard stuff like that, but there was a lot of truth to it.
Mike, you mentioned doing play-by-play at Fordham, something you still stay in the mix of now, and you started your career as a radio host, then went to TV host. How much of that versatility that we know Bob instills in his students has benefited you specifically in your career?
I would imagine, and you'd have a good sense of this, Manuel, just because I know you've won awards for play-by-play, and I would imagine most of the guys on the staff, they want to be play-by-play guys. Is that sort of, and I shouldn't say guys, I use that term for both genders, but the females that are also on staff, like, they want to be on air. Typically it's a lot of calling games. And, I would be honest with you. I mean, that was definitely cool. And I loved it. And I love when I get an opportunity to do some of those types of events, but the radio work, doing one-on-one for me personally in my career was the game changer. When I graduated, so Rich McLaughlin, I don't know if you guys know Rich, but Rich was a couple years older than me at Fordham, and he had the Mets credential before I did. You talk about Bob, like, I don't know if I have my jobs if it's not for Rich, who, I get to talk with, friends on Facebook, and we message every once in a while, but, I haven't connected with him, and I probably should. And it's a good reminder after we finish up this podcast. But Rich had gotten a job at Sirius Radio at the time. We're on campus for homecoming. We're in the parking lot, hanging out, maybe playing some games and winning. And Rich says, "What are you doing?" And I said, I just got hired by the small radio station in New Jersey to do high school sports, just do some reporting. And you guys know this, right? Like, you're sending your tape. Actually, you guys don't send tapes. You send emails with links to your reels. But back in the day, there was like literally DVDs that I would put in the mail and send out to different radio stations and television stations. And Rich said, "Look, I'm at Sirius Radio. I'm doing, a lot of music." And he got hooked up because of some of the relationships from Fordham, specifically at WFUV. Rich says, "Hey, get me your stuff." All right, fast forward. I send him my tape. He gives it to the executive producer. A couple days later, I'm in for an interview, and they hire me, and I'm doing this overnight update. And then fast forward, you're hosting multiple shows. Things fell into place for me in a big way. But I say that because Rich was working on a show at the time, and I ended up doing updates on that show. Rich got so busy with music, he said, "Look, I just don't have the bandwidth to host these shows anymore." That show at the time didn't have, so we called it a host. I don't know if you guys still call that, but basically the point guard on the show. And I had done that for, 3 years, basically doing one-on-one. So I understood, what it was like to be a point guard on the show. And I love being a point guard. And, they gave me an opportunity, like one show, and no one had really said anything. And the next show came, and I just started talking when we started the show, and I wasn't just doing updates. And then fast forward, you get more and more opportunities. But it was great. That versatility, I always tell people this: if you can do radio, you can do television. If you can do TV, that doesn't mean you can do radio. And I think the ability to host those radio shows when I was in college was a game changer for me, because I understood transitions, whether I knew that it was a transition or how to host or those skills. I'm not sure if I was fully aware of some of the formatics of it and what those movements were kind of called. I say movements like I'm an actual basketball player or something, but things that you're doing that you're not even aware of, right? Because you guys are listening back to your shows, and I would do that as well and just kind of critique myself. And hey, did that sound smooth? Did it not sound smooth? How do I get to point A to point B? How do I have a conversation with someone? Like, we're talking here, guys, and I used to have a set of questions when I would do one-on-one, but as I got older, I got more comfortable with the refs, where I'd have an idea of where I wanted to go, but it was about listening and following up on some of those things. So that skill helped me big time when I got to NBA TV, and then when I got to ESPN, and then certainly, almost the last 10 years at Pac-12 Network. It got to the point at Pac-12 where, we just, last couple of years, I won't use prompter, because I want the conversations that are happening in our green room, or was happening, because I don't work there anymore. It's still a little fresh and raw, guys. Like you get to that point where it's like, hey, the conversations we were having in the green room with our analysts, like that's what I wanted on our set. So it was more important to me to listen to them while we were watching the games and prompt them and sort of bookmark some of the things that we were discussing, and then just do it on set for everyone who was watching.
Mike, kind of bouncing around with your career a little bit, you worked at ESPN. You were an anchor there for about 4 years, like you mentioned.
Sure.
When everyone thinks of the sports media industry, the worldwide leader in sports always come up in ESPN. What was it like working there? Do you remember your first day working there?
Oh, hell yeah. Are you kidding me, man? It's ESPN. Do I remember? I could tell you everything about my audition as well beforehand. It's really wild. You're right. It's the worldwide leader. It's these great opportunities. And, Jackson, I'd be lying if I told you that that experience, man, like that's made my career. There's no other place on the planet that you get the reps that you get there. There's no place to go but up and get better. So I'll give you a great example. About a year after I had gotten hired, so I was working, ESPN news shifts, a little bit of SportsCenter. I would do some basketball shows, some NBA shows. So you're doing a little bit of everything. But it was the first time I was doing television full time. Like NBA TV, I was a freelancer, and during the NBA season, I was working a ton, but it wasn't the same as ESPN. So you might go, 5 days of your work week, and you're doing, 3-hour shows, 3-hour shifts on ESPN News, or a 3-hour SportsCenter on television. You only can get better. And I was there for a year. I didn't fully unpack. And about a year after I was living in West Hartford, which is really close to Bristol, in the studios, I'm unpacking a box and I see a DVD, and it's a copy of my reel. So I throw it into the DVD player, and Jackson, I couldn't believe the place even hired me. I couldn't get over how bad I was in this reel. And it's just this growth. And you guys probably have seen it in your careers. Like if you listen back when you're putting together your radio reel, your senior year, like I always tell a lot of folks, like, hey, just pile it up. Like, I don't know what system you use, but basically have that timeline. And as you get something better, you take something off and you put it back in, but you always have those files handy. And, you know, you're not using stuff from your sophomore year, you know, on your reel when you graduate, because you're going to get better as time goes on. But those days at ESPN, those hours, the friendships that I made, it was awesome. But you're put in situations that you just won't be put in at any other network. And it's, I won't say a training ground, but because, you know, at that point it's big time. But at that point, like, you're just expected to be able to execute on those shows. And then you leave and you go someplace else. And there was nothing at Pac-12 Network that was going to happen on that set that I hadn't experienced before. Hey, prompter goes down. All right, whatever. Like, no big deal. Like, you're just rocking and rolling. Hey, you know, my audition at Pac-12 Network, I think part of the reason why I got the job, I had to read a highlight. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with the shot sheet, but basically if you're doing, you know, a sports show, they give you a shot sheet that's got the situation, description of the play, and the result. And typically if you're doing Sports Center, you're probably doing, you know, a 3-play, 45 seconds, 30 seconds, the big game, minute and a half. You know, Super Bowl highlight might be, you know, 3 minutes or something like that. They gave me a highlight and a shot sheet. The damn thing was over 5 minutes long. And I mean, I had stuff, they told me what the game was going to be. So I had pages and pages on a notepad of notes. I had something ready for like every single play. But I'm working with two analysts, Glenn Parker at the time, who was in on my audition, and Curtis Conway, two guys that I've become great friends with. And we finished the A block of the audition, and I turn around and Glenn says to me, he's like, hey, I don't want to jinx anything for you, but I just want to let you know, the guys who've auditioned, you're the only one who didn't have to stop down. Thinking to myself, oh. But that goes back to, hey, I know how to call something off of a shot sheet, even if it is 5 minutes and I'm working with an analyst and it's easy to get lost. So the longest answer to your question, which I didn't even answer about my first day at ESPN in that first show, but yes, I remember everything about it. Steve Berthiaume, who is now the voice of the Diamondbacks, his wife, Cindy Brunson, has been amazing to me over the years. But I worked with Steve. They hook you up there when you first start, or at least they used to, where they'd give you a vet who could show you the ropes a little bit. And Steve was great. Dari Noka was amazing. Steve Bunin certainly comes to mind. One of my best friends on the planet, Kevin Connors, who not only helped me professionally, but a couple years older, we were, you know, well, he's married now and he's got 2 kids, but you know, we would hang out, and like that helped my transition, you know, on a personal level when I was in Connecticut. So many great things, so many great memories, and I'm going to shut up and let you guys ask another question.
You mentioned how it's much easier to nail down TV once you're familiar with radio, but going from a radio job to a TV job can present its set of challenges. What was that like, going from a host at Sirius to a host at ESPN, and that process in the days leading up?
You know, the transition was helped, Emmanuel, because I was double dipping. I was working at Sirius Radio at the time and NBA TV. And the only reason why I got the NBA TV job was because I was doing NBA radio. And at the time, this was before Turner had taken over NBA TV. They were based in Secaucus, and the league ran the network in New Jersey. So they would use guys like Bruce Beck, Gary Apple, who I think, you know, the audience, whoever's listening to this podcast, probably Northeast, and Bruce I used to intern for Bruce. And Gary, you know, actually, you want to hear a crazy story. Gary, I never worked with professionally, other than we would sometimes swap spots at NBA TV. Like, he would host a show and then I would host the show after, but we didn't have a ton of crossover. You know, when I lost my gig and my contract wasn't renewed, Gary reaches out and he's like, hey, give me a call. And like, he gives me like the best pep talk in the history, you know, well, give me a great pep talk. And he didn't have to give me a pep talk, because we, you know, it wasn't like it was Bruce, right, who I was his intern, and Fran Charles, who's at MLB Network. Like, we didn't even have like this solidified friendship, but it goes to show you just, you know, good people willing to help, you know, just people who are a little bit down. But it was awesome. Like, that transition, like they gave me a shot to audition because Gary and Bruce Beck and some of the other anchors were in Torino for the Olympics, because, you know, Olympic time, a lot of the local affiliates in New York, that's certainly going to happen. They send their sports people there. So they needed someone to do the fantasy show. And I had played fantasy when I was in high school in New Jersey at Berkeley Catholic, and RealGM.com. It was on NBA.com's website, and it was like a link there. And So I understood it. And, Emmanuel, I basically like did radio shows on television. I didn't really know what the hell I was doing at the time. And that helped, because when I got to ESPN, I wasn't coming from a local television background where I would do 3 minutes of sports, and then they were asking me to do 3 minutes of sports, or 3 hours of Sports Center. So the volume I understood, and because I went from doing 6 hours of radio, hop from Midtown Manhattan, get into the car, drive to Secaucus, and I would do TV all night. So I understood what it was like to be in those situations. So the adjustment for me wasn't as hard, because I understood volume. And then, you get to Pac-12 and there's volume there because of the long days, and hopefully there's more of that at NFL Network for me.
Mike, want to leave you with this, because you obviously have such a captivating story. You authored a piece back in February, how an undocumented immigrant may be the luckiest sportscaster in the world. Can you kind of elaborate on how much your family and your story, how much of an impact that's had on your career?
Yeah. There was a time, guys, especially because we talked about my time at ESPN, where it was stick to sports, right? Like, you didn't see. Now we're in a climate where there's current athletes that are playing that have, messages about social justice on their jerseys and their helmets and their uniforms and on the courts and the whole thing, which is amazing. But there was a time when that just wasn't, you didn't do that stuff, and you didn't talk politics when you were on air. And, about a year or so ago, guys, I'm watching the news and I'm just seeing all these stories about these kids that are undocumented, with their parents getting separated. And it was breaking my heart. Like, it's like a pretty messed up thing, and I'll use cleaner language because I know it's a podcast and I want to be inappropriate, but my God, it was like crushing me to see that. And like, even now, you're watching these debates, or obviously Biden won, but like during the debates, it's like, what was it, like 500 kids that they can't even find their parents? Like, that was killing me, man. And at that point, I don't really know exactly what had happened, but kind of internally, but I just sort of said to myself, like, my God, like, I don't know if I have the opportunities that I have right now had it not been for my grandfather, who was undocumented and from Hong Kong, and basically got a job as a sailor, and when the ship was docking in Baltimore, didn't get back on the ship. And there's like a real struggle. He wasn't with my dad and my aunts and uncles when they were in Hong Kong. He would send money back there, and then eventually he saved up enough where he was able to bring them to the States. And like, that's not even easy. Like, I wish I could tell you that, my dad and my aunts and uncles had this great storybook ending where, all of a sudden it's like, oh, hey, we're going to the United States and it's all going to be good. It's like, no, man, like, there was a language issue. There was, teachers that weren't supportive. My dad, I don't think had, certainly didn't have the resources. He wasn't worried about, the Little League game that I got to go and play, and the swim meets that I got to go and do. And of course, I got to go to Fordham with great resources at FUV. Like, that wasn't his path, and it wasn't the path of my aunts and uncles. But I see, like, me and my cousins and some of the sacrifices that, my grandparents and certainly my dad and my aunts and uncles were able to make. And I just think to myself, like, my God, like, how lucky am I to be in this situation? And yet, that segment of the population had been vilified for a few years. Undocumented immigrants, like, they're not bad people. Like, that's just not, there are some, like, I'm not denying that, but there's, people that don't have what we have here in the States and are in desperate situations, trying to escape poverty, safety issues as well for them. And, to be honest with you, I just kind of wanted to humanize the story, because I just think it's way easy to watch news coverage and say, oh, these people are really bad and they're criminals. It's like, no, that's not accurate. That's not everyone. There's bad people, and there's bad people, by the way, that are that are not undocumented immigrants. We've seen that as well. So I just think you got to take every case individually. And I just know how fortunate I've been in my career, certainly, but just in life. My God, like, you guys, you probably don't even realize how lucky you are just to be at Fordham. Just, you walk that campus, and maybe you have an appreciation because you guys are doing virtual learning right now. But, every time I've had an opportunity to be back on that campus and head down to Pugsley's and get, a chicken roll, my God, I miss those days. Like, it brings a smile to my face. And those were some of the best years of my life.
Mike, appreciate a few minutes. Congrats again.
Sure.
And thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, you guys rock, man. I appreciate the invite. I always get excited when I see the episodes post on my timeline on Twitter. So keep rocking it, and seriously, like, best of luck to both of you guys moving on in your careers.
Appreciate that, Mike. Thank you.
To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Welcome back, everybody. 1:47 a.m. here on the East Coast. Got another 13 minutes, maybe more like 12 with you. And the NBA draft is next week, so let's talk about the New York Knicks. I'm Jimmy Sullivan. Dylan Balsamo, Chris Hennessy will join me in just a moment. A lot of news surrounding the Knicks, a lot of conjecture more so than hard news going on with the New York Knicks right now, and that, of course, surrounds Russell Westbrook. The star point guard of the Houston Rockets reportedly wants out after Daryl Morey left the organization at the end of October. Westbrook, it should be noted, only spent 1 year in Houston. It remains to be seen if and where he will be traded to before the beginning of the season. So a lot to work out there in Houston. James Harden reportedly wants to stay with the Rockets, but Russell Westbrook wants out. One of the teams rumored to be in on Russell Westbrook potentially is the New York Knicks. And guys, I want your opinion on this. It feels like a typical New York Knicks move to go out and trade for Russell Westbrook. But Dylan, I'll go to you. What do you think about this possibility that the Knicks could make this splash?
You know what, Jimmy, you're absolutely right that this sounds like absolutely the kind of thing that the Knicks would do. And here's the thing about when the Knicks will trade for a star, barring Carmelo Anthony, however long ago that was, they like to go after people that, like, I don't think would want to play for the Knicks right now, and that just creates a worse environment. It creates a worse situation. We saw a passing of the torch in terms of ownership this week in New York sports with another orange and blue team in the Mets. And part of what was bad with the Mets is that, like, the environment that the Wilpons had created was unhealthy. It was toxic. And that seems to be the situation with the Knicks right now. So, they can go after Russell Westbrook all they want. They trade for Russell Westbrook. That's their decision, not mine, luckily. But if they think that's going to solve all their problems, they'd be very silly to think that.
Yeah, I agree for the most part. I think that Russell Westbrook makes the team better in the short run. I don't think you can possibly argue against that. But it hinders your cap situation. It doesn't create a title contending team like what is just one borough south. Like, Brooklyn is a title contending team this year if all other pieces can stay healthy. So to me, I don't see Russell Westbrook as a fit for the New York Knicks at all. But if they field the team that they currently have under roster, they're going to win like 8 games. So it's really tough for me to say that they shouldn't go get Russell Westbrook because they stink out loud. And I think what we're going to see on, I think the draft is this week, right? Tuesday night, Wednesday night, is they're just going to fill another position. I think when you talk about this draft, they just got to take the best player because you have RJ Barrett, who was the best player available when you drafted him at small forward, most likely. Pick the best player. If it's Obi Toppin from Dayton, great. If I don't think James Wiseman will fall that far, but if he does, great. Whoever it is, just take the best player. You need to continue to build this starting 5 with young, talented, cheap guys right now. And Russell Westbrook is talented, but he's not young and he's not cheap.
Also, not for nothing, if you trade for Russell Westbrook, you're looking at 3 years, $130 million you have to pay for a guy who's going to be 35, 36 years old at the end of that contract. And you look at people like Russell Westbrook, super athletic, not a great shooter, not a great spacer, very explosive player. As much as I hate to say it, those types of players in the NBA don't age well. And, you know, Westbrook's been pretty healthy. He dealt with injuries in the bubble, but there were more injuries in the bubble, it seemed. So that makes sense coming back from the layoff. But if you look at that, and you know, people have been talking about the Knicks making a splash potentially, I would rather them go out and trade for Chris Paul if that's the option. You know, yes, Chris Paul is, you know, a little older, but you only have to really pay for 2 years at that point, and he could actually, I mean, we just saw him do it in Oklahoma City. He could actually mentor some of these young guys, whoever's left after they make a trade like that, and actually help the franchise. I don't know if Russell Westbrook will do that. And yeah, there's this whole argument about, you know, is Russell Westbrook a team guy? I'm trying not to buy too much into that, but I think for the Knicks, I would honestly just feel better if they, you know, depending on what they do in the draft, I would just rather they stay where they are. It's not a great draft. We've talked about this before. There have been certain proposals about them moving up to number 1, which would probably require them giving up at least Mitchell Robinson. Do I want to do that? Probably not. So, you know, I think as bad as it sounds, it's a Knicks team that I actually think will probably be a little better next year just because Tom Thibodeau is the coach. And, you know, say what you will about him in terms of managing people's minutes or not. He can coach. And I think that'll help the Knicks achieve a baseline of competence. Whether or not they get much more remains to be seen. But I think the Knicks are probably just better off riding this out. I don't think making a move for the sake of making a move is the way to go here.
Another part of this is, and we've touched on this a little bit, just you talk about who would be left, but to whether or not Russell Westbrook wants to stay where he is, you're gonna have to give something up to get him either way. And what do the Knicks have to give? You know what I mean? I mean,
picks. Picks. It's the only thing.
All they have 3 higher up draft picks. You'd say, right before on the draft, whether it's Tuesday or Wednesday. Who the heck knows? It's Wednesday. Okay.
What are days anymore, anyway?
What are days? What are days? It was a months-long pandemic where days didn't matter, and then election day was a week. So, but yeah. So the big part for me is like, what do you have to offer in order to get Russell Westbrook, or like you said, Chris Paul? It's like other than picks. So people who don't exist, that's the quite literal player to be named later. Yeah, you're going to name the player later. But I don't know where the Knicks are coming from. It's too much. It's way too much.
I think that Knox and or Ntilikina is the answer to your question. But those guys' trade values are in the tank because they're just not that good. Like, Ntilikina's shown some things. Knox has played okay. But at the end of the day, what they've shown on the court is that they're not that good. Like, I hate to be that blunt about it, but like, the Knicks don't have a lot of pieces that are tradable that other teams will find likable outside of first round picks and RJ Barrett. And I don't want to give any of those things up if I'm Leon Rose and the Knicks. I think that they just have to, like, it's hard to say even because what free agent wants to play for this team? Like, I could say, wait for next year and Giannis will be a free agent. You could throw every dollar at him because you have nobody on a non-rookie contract. Well, Giannis isn't going to want to play here. He's going to want to go to the Heat or stay with the Bucks or go to the Warriors. Like, he's not going to want to go to the Knicks and play on another bad team with bad owners. Like, he just left Milwaukee to win an NBA championship. He's not going to go to the Knicks. So, to me, it's about developing the young guys so much more with the Knicks than anybody else because they're not going to attract anybody, if it's not in a trade in which they have to trade away the young guys who are bad.
It's funny you talk about Knox and Ntilikina because Knicks fans seem to love Ntilikina and hate Knox, and their production is not that much different, which is really weird to me. And in fact, Ntilikina was drafted to run the triangle that Phil Jackson left behind like a week later. So, that's the Knicks for you. But yeah, I just don't see it happening. And as we head into the draft, we don't know who the Knicks are going to take. They're sitting at 8 right now. Will they trade up? Will they trade down? Will they stay where they are? I'm personally rooting for Obi Toppin. That's just me. I watched him at Dayton last year. It was really, really fun. If he falls that far, I'm skeptical it'll happen, but any excuse to get an Obi Toppin Knicks jersey is good with me. But it'll be interesting to see where the Knicks wind up. But one thing I think you can count on, much like the Mets and the Jets, is a certain incompetence that comes from that organization simply because of who's in charge. And I think, unfortunately, for Knicks fans, and I know a bunch of them, I unfortunately have to think that some degree of that will just stay that way as long as the Dolans are in charge. And that's just the way it is.
Yeah, it's all about the energy and here's the thing. You talk about someone like Giannis, and you can throw every dollar you want at him. That is a lot to expect a player to very selflessly say, I want to be the one to turn this franchise around, when you could go win so much more easily with maybe 20 of the different NBA franchises other than the New York Knicks. So that's a lot to expect of a player, and until the Knicks and their fans really change that mindset, nothing's going to happen.
No, nothing's going to happen. And I think it's something that we look at with the Jets, as less with the Mets because it's less of a one-person sport. But with the Jets, the talk around Sam Darnold and now around Trevor Lawrence is he can be the guy. Like, he can be next Broadway Joe. Like, there's only one guy in Jets history who is immortal. It's number 12. And Sam Darnold can be that guy. Mark Sanchez can be that guy. Trevor Lawrence can be that guy. Some kid who's currently sitting in his 6th grade math class can be that guy. It's 1:59 in the morning. I hope he's not in math class. But you know what I mean? But the Knicks, it doesn't feel like it's going to happen until they get like the number 1 pick in the year with the superstar, right? They get the Anthony Davis number 1 pick, Zion number 1 pick, which they didn't get either one of. But that kind of number 1 pick, that guy isn't going to just come knocking on the door and say, pay me, because they don't want to be here.
That is rather a sad way to end this, but that is the way it is. Well, this has been a great show. I'm excited that for everyone to hear and see this however they will. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We want to thank our guests, Mike Yam and Jake Brown. It's been a wonderful show. Our producer, Alex Woles, who deserves all the credit in the world for everything that One-on-One's been able to do in the last few months. So on behalf of Jimmy Sullivan with headlines and my partner, Chris Hennessy, my name is Dylan Balsamo. One-on-One is a production of WFUV Sports. However you were listening, however you're watching, thank you, good night, and please go to bed. Good night.